For those not familiar with TechNet, we were founded in 1997 to promote the growth of the innovation economy by advocating a targeted policy agenda in Washington and across the 50 states. In addition to the federal team that you're meeting here today, we have 7 regional executive directors who oversee our work across the 50 states. On many issues affecting our economy and society, such as data privacy, our workforce, and today, as we're talking about AI, TechNet is actively advancing policy discussions at every level. Since our founding, we've been led by CEOs and senior executives representing dynamic American businesses ranging from startups to the most iconic brands on the planet, employing 4.5 million people and the investors supporting their growth. We champion policies that foster a climate of innovation and competition, allowing America's tech industry to flourish and lead the world. When policymakers are grappling with today's most transformative technologies, they turn to us. That's why we're all here today. TechNet member companies are leading the safe and responsible development and deployment of artificial intelligence and smart AI policy. Americans have been using AI for many years to help navigate traffic, search the internet, undertake research, conduct a spell check, vacuum their home, and discover new music. AI is also being used to more accurately predict severe weather, to protect critical infrastructure, defend against cyber threats, and accelerate the development of new medical treatments, including life-saving vaccines and earlier signs of cancer. But as I look at the news coverage of AI, I'm struck by how much of the conversation is focused on hypotheticals of what could go wrong rather than how AI is being used responsibly today. We need a more balanced, fact-based conversation. That's why yesterday we announced that TechNet is launching AI for America, a $25 million initiative to demystify and familiarize policymakers with AI and how it is being used to improve lives, grow our economy, and keep us safe. The AI for America initiative starts today with this event, the first in a series. You'll hear directly from leading American companies about the ways they're using AI to improve transportation, education, employment, and other sectors of our economy, as well as the policies needed for America to remain the global AI leader. You'll hear from Congressman Jay Obernolte, who's been a leader on AI policy and is one of the few members of Congress with a background in AI. We're honored he's joining us. You'll also hear from 2 top company executives, NASDAQ's Chief Technology and Information Officer, Brad Peterson, and GetAround CEO, Sam Zaid. Before we hear from them, it is important that we all have a baseline understanding of AI. That's why I'm proud to introduce the first speaker, Douglas Eck. Doug is Senior Research Director at Google DeepMind. Doug created Magenta, an ongoing research project exploring the role of AI in art and music creation. He is also an advocate for PAIR, a multidisciplinary team that explores the human side of AI through fundamental research, building tools, creating design frameworks, and working with diverse communities. Doug, thank you for joining us, and we're excited for your presentation.
Thank you, Linda, for the kind introduction. Let me just bring this up here. All right. Here we are. I hope you have your coffee or your tea or whatever you happen to drink. My name's Doug. I am, in fact, a research scientist at Google. I've been doing machine learning research for, I did the math, almost 30 years. I started my PhD in 1994. And so we're going to do a little bit of work here together. There will not be a quiz, but I'm going to try to take you through some of the technical details, some of the intuitions that I've learned over my career, and hopefully you'll leave with a slightly more concrete definition of what AI is and have a better idea of what we do every day. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with some definitions. We have this nice Venn diagram. We have this funny term called artificial intelligence, and many of us in the AI community kind of pushed against that term because we like this other phrase, machine learning. It's closer to what AI really is these days. And so I want to talk a minute about machine learning and how it relates to other forms of AI. So think of AI in general as the science of making things smart, right? We want computers to help us solve hard problems, right? Maybe it's drug discovery, as Linda mentioned, list a number of things. And there was a divide all the way back to the 1980s, 1990s, between 2 fundamentally different approaches to how to make machines smart. One of them is what we would call traditional artificial intelligence, and you might think of this as the smart scientist with the white lab coat sitting down at her computer and figuring out the answer. Let's be really smart. Let's just see if we can write down the recipe. And so if we get concrete about this, let's imagine for some reason you have the task of, given an image, a digital image, you have the task of recognizing whether or not it's an elephant. Okay? So if you think about the parable of the blind man and the elephant, one blind man is grabbing the trunk and says, oh, it's like a snake, and another one is grabbing the leg and says, oh, it's got big legs, and they all feel it's rough. You can imagine that there are some features of an elephant that you might want to use. You might say, okay, it's gray. Okay, you're a smart computer programmer. You say, okay, if the picture is gray, it's likely to be an elephant, and so forth. You might say it has big ears, and sit down and spend an afternoon trying to write a computer program that can figure out whether something has an ear or not, right? And so you could just keep working and working and working at this problem, trying to write down the recipe for is it an elephant or not. And this was a very serious direction of research for a couple of decades at least, the idea that we can figure out the answer, we can outsmart the world. That's what I thought of as AI when I was doing my PhD. There's a whole other community, the machine learning community, that tried a different tack. And that tack is maybe we can write a computer program that itself can learn. And the most successful version of this is a neural network. And fundamentally, the neural network looks at the pixels in the image and learns different features of the image, not by being told what those features are, but by correlating them with a label like is an elephant or is not an elephant. And so if you analyze neural networks trained on image data sets with labeled data, like this is an elephant, they actually learn to detect features in the image that look like edge detectors, color detectors, and then pull those very basic features together into a classifier of is this an elephant or not, that is much, much more effective. So that the lesson here is we want these machines to learn how to solve hard problems. The answer is in the data, right? But it's not necessarily obvious what that answer is. If the answer were obvious, we could just write out the answer. And for a large class of problems, that's just fine. But for many hard problems, and those hard problems that can fuel innovation and grow our economy, it actually just works better to let these systems learn. And we're not going to talk about the math of the learning, but the math of the learning is high school calculus. It's not hard, the math of the learning. What's hard is to get it right, to think carefully about how to structure data. So there we are with machine learning, right? Machine learning is the machine itself figures out what the elephant is. And then there's that little circle in there, it says generative AI. This is one of the areas that is really growing tremendously quickly right now. This is simply the idea of saying, maybe if I have a machine that has learned how to detect an elephant, and I hope you'll dream about elephants tonight, trust me, use it over and over again. It just occurred to me, isn't that one of the political parties? That's not why I used it. My tie is purple, y'all. Where was I? Oh, is that, well, maybe then, through similar mechanisms, we can generate an image of an elephant, or we can generate the structure of a protein, right? And so it's slightly harder to do this than it is to detect things. And in fact, we have these terms of classification, classifying whether something is an elephant versus generative. But the family of generative AI has grown tremendously, especially in the space of large language models. So let's go to the next slide. We're going to speed up a little bit. We see, writ large, the framing that I just gave you. Next slide, please. In this graph, this timeline, and I need to see my version of it a little bit better here. So back in 2011, we started to be able to use neural networks. You see the phrase deep learning. This simply means a neural network that has multiple layers so that it can learn progressively richer and richer representations of the problem it's trying to solve. And what you're looking at there is what's called a spectrogram. It's a picture of sound that shows someone saying something. And we started to figure out speech recognition, started to figure out how to take audio and understand what the underlying words are in that audio. that unlocked a number of capabilities. In 2012, we started to be able to classify images. This is an image of a cat. And we started to then, by 2016, be able to pull these building blocks together that, frankly, back in 2011, outside from speech, weren't all that useful. 5 years later, we're starting to solve meaningful problems with systems that learn. And one of the breakthroughs was neural translation. And at that point in time, we were using other forms of AI models, but effectively AI models that tried to write down the solution, that were using our knowledge of language grammar, our knowledge of how language is structured, that logical structure, and trying to leverage that for translation. Instead, we gave up on that and just showed the neural network pairs of sentences that were in different languages, and the neural network figured it out. And what that led to, there was a really nice article from all the way back in 2016, I believe it was the New York Times, looking at neural translation and just how the author almost got poetic about like how lyrical, how beautiful the translations were compared to what was before. He was back translating English novels into Japanese and back again, and looking at how much it captured of the language. And these models capture much, much more of the spirit of a language than you're getting from previous versions. And then another tremendous breakthrough came, a new architecture called Transformer that landed in 2017. That came from our group, from Google Research. And in fact, I led that team, 2018, that team reported to me, and if you want to know what it's like to try to lead researchers, just this basically herding cats, you know, there's not, I don't tell anybody what to do, it doesn't work that way. And this model gave us a new architecture. It's another neural network. Fundamentally, it's the same math, but it learns what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to in a sentence or in a paragraph. I don't have time to dive into that. It's fascinating. There are tutorials are online, but that's why the paper is called Attention is All You Need. It's kind of a joking title. And this is the T in GPT, right? This technology is everywhere right now. And I'm very proud that we built it, we open sourced it, we drove this research. Some of you may be asking, why would you open source something like that? One is, research is hard. This paper was not a best paper award. This paper was not noticed when it came out. No one said, oh my God, this is going to change the industry. Do we publish it or not? It's hard, right? So this was some breakthrough that ended up having legs, that worked, right? But at the time, we didn't know. Let's fast forwarding to the present. This has unblocked a tremendous amount of innovation, especially in language models, and then also in other related areas like diffusion for image generation. Okay, so next slide, please. In parallel, we've seen all the way back to 2015, this is Google only, and we could build similar maps for other companies. We could build similar maps for across the industry, the gradual introduction of AI into products. And these don't have to be massive breakthroughs. This might be something like suggested actions in a document. This might be something like some spelling and some grammar suggestions, right? But they start to pile up. And so what you should know is that even though AI seems new, in all of the industry partners you're going to hear from today, I hope you'll probably hear the same message. AI has been around for a long time, right? We've seen these innovations happening. We've seen an explosion of interest. We've definitely seen generative AI offer us new capabilities, but this technology has been with us for a long time, and we have a lot of knowledge of how to build and to make sense of these systems. Next slide, please. Pivoting to large language models, I think it's important to spend a little bit of time just on this issue. What is a large language model? Okay. So I talked to you about neural networks that learn from examples. The trick of a large language model is it learns from the text itself how to make sense of language. And the trick is quite simple. It wasn't obvious to everybody right away that this would work, but imagine that you take some language and you just hide one word. You just don't show the neural network one word, right? And then it tries to predict the word, and you nudge the network mathematically to be more likely to predict the missing word next time. So imagine you have Jane kicked the ball, Jane kicked the football, Jane kicked the, right? There are a number of likely words. What happens is by being challenged to predict the missing word and then being corrected gently, the model gradually picks up on the structure of language to the point where when the model is new, when it's not been trained at all, it's just making random predictions over the possible words that it's shown. It might say Jane kicked the between, Jane kicked the avocado, it doesn't know. Gradually, it forms more and more subtle predictions to the point where it doesn't always predict ball, but it has think of it like a loaded dice. It's more likely to say ball, much more likely to say ball, but it's also likely to say yellow, because it might have kicked a yellow tennis ball, right? Okay, so gradually these models learn the structure of language, and the word large is in there because there's a lot of structure to learn, right? So the models have a lot of adjustable numbers that can be nudged around so that it learns about deep structure in language. And then through this pre-training, we can then do different things like classify. We can fine-tune, meaning we can take a language model trained on language in general and steer it to some purpose, like some sort of maybe a scientific discovery purpose. And we can also generate from it. Next slide, please. There's also some surprises left behind all of this. One is that these models are characterized by emergent abilities. That's a funny phrase. But what we've seen is as we make these models larger and larger, they exhibit a kind of fluency. You see that fluency if you're working with our chatbot Bard, or if you're working with ChatGPT or other models like that. They speak English, right? And underneath all of that, we've seen that as the models are larger, they reach a certain size, and they exhibit some surprising behaviors. Don't read this as like, ooh, scary behaviors. By being emergent, it doesn't mean they're scary. But like, they see enough data and they start to be able to do 3-digit arithmetic. By that I just mean, what is the sum? You just ask in text, what is the sum of 353 and 212, and it gives you the answer. And when the models are smaller, they just don't have enough capacity to have learned enough to solve that problem. And so we're seeing as these models scale and get larger and larger, say maybe 20 billion adjustable numbers, parameters, we're looking at 3-digit arithmetic, and then we see even more showing up as they get larger than that. And they're also changing how we interact with data and intelligent systems. So concretely, you can think about this as translation, right? So we can translate from English to Vietnamese, okay? We have a recent project where effectively the model translates from English to controlling a robot in your home. And the way it works is quite clever. You say to the robot, imagine, this was thinking about especially people with disabilities, I spilled my Coke, would you please get me another one? And an intent like that, a high-level intent, it turns out hard in robotics. It's hard to give a high-level intent to a robot. What the language model does is it's trained to break it down to a bunch of smaller tasks. That's all the language model does. It's trained on other text. It says, okay, walk to the refrigerator, open the refrigerator door, look for a Coca-Cola, grab the Coca-Cola with your arm, turn around, come back to the person that's sitting at their table, bring them the Coca-Cola. Those then can be more easily translated into robot-ese, the control language of that particular robot, and it's unblocked tremendous speed-ups in training robots. And you could say, well, wait, we already know how to write in robot-ese, whatever the control language is of the robot, and that's true, but it's just like figuring out the elephant. It turns out to be really hard to write, move the arm 1 meter, rotate, like all of those tiny controls are just incredibly difficult to write. So the language model is acting as like an interaction surface between our language, right? We're in control, and a number of downstream tasks. So when you think about language models, expand to language as in, Spanish and English, but also pixel values could be treated as a language, and now you're generating images, right? We generate protein sequences, like with AlphaFold, and those are just the letters, the alphabetic representations of the amino acids, right? And so we can translate into massively different domains, reusing the same technology. Next slide, please. I know I'm going over. So here we are, summing up. We have technology that allows us to learn from language. We're able to scale that technology up to coming close to trillions of parameters. Right now we're in the high billions. and we have the compute to do what we need to do. And this is, frankly speaking to this crowd, this is a massive advantage that we have. We should be proud in the United States to have developed this technology. This is, frankly, a competitive advantage that we should strive to keep. And at Google, we're partners in this effort to move the field forward safely and responsibly, and to continue growing the economy with this technology. Next slide, please. So finally, in this section, I wanted to point out, I've hinted at some of this already, but this transformative progress, this future discovery, we're talking about language models, we're seeing things like chatbots, which are great, it's fun, okay? But this technology is much more general than we might think. AlphaFold really almost solved protein folding. It's a massive advance for science. Drug discovery, being able to discover new vaccines, being able to understand the structure of mRNA. Robotics, I talked about robotics. Diagnostic imagery, being able to help doctors predict and understand disease. And by the way, sidebar, this isn't about replacing doctors at all. In fact, the technologies that we've been building, one of the most important aspects of that technology is to provide doctors with supporting evidence of why, for example, we might think that this tumor is cancerous. It's not enough to say this tumor is cancerous with 99% probability. We outline it. We say this looks like it might be cancerous, and then the doctors correct, the doctors analyze, the doctors use that technology. And so, we're moving forward with partners in the industry to extend and improve capability, fraud detection, protein mapping, crop forecasting, it goes on. So I'm very excited about this technology. I hope it shows. I think we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us over the next 2 decades at least to continue to fan out this technology, to grow our economy, and to solve bunches of cool problems. Next slide, please. So wait, what could possibly go wrong? Well, these are powerful technologies, and we have to be responsible. So I want to close with some observations on responsible AI development, and I want to make sure that we align on that aspect of what we're doing, because we do have a need and a responsibility to carry this forward without causing any societal harms. So, first slide, next slide. So yeah, this is in the press. Hallucination. Content farms, so misinformation, discrimination in the workplace, toxicity. These are all real issues that we need to grapple with, right? And we as AI researchers can provide tooling for transparency, for analysis, but these are also policy decisions, right? It's on all of us together with all of the different core competencies that we bring to the table to be able to address these problems. Next slide, please. So what are we doing at Google? Well, we have outlined a number of AI principles that we are following internally. We're working to educate. We're working to educate right here, right now, really, key stakeholders to demystify this technology so people go home and understand what we're grappling with. By the way, I'm very impressed across the board, giving talks. How many people have used ChatGPT? Yeah, see, if I asked a question like that 5 years ago, you're all like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. I mean, not ChatGPT specifically, but the level of sophistication in the room across the board has grown. And then, building out reliable structures and processes. So next slide, please. So our AI principles. This is worth reading. We've spent 3 or 4 years at least working on these principles. They're online for you to find if you just search for Google's AI principles in your favorite search engine. We should strive to have AI that is socially beneficial, avoid creating unfair or reinforcing unfair bias, built and trusted for safety, be accountable to people, be fair with respect to privacy, uphold scientific excellence, and be made available for uses that accord with these principles, okay? And we are holding ourselves accountable to implement only models and only systems that follow these AI principles. And we've been sharing these widely across the industry, and we're aligning, the major industry players are aligning around these and other. There are different versions of these principles from different stakeholder groups, but fundamentally, this is what it's about. And we absolutely need to avoid causing overall harm, weapons or those that direct injury, surveillance violating internationally accepted norms, and work that contravenes international law and human rights. Okay. Next slide, please. And on top of this, there's this framing of, I love this framing of bold and responsible. There's this middle ground that we have to find. being too bold and just running roughshod through the world is not going to work. This is where we'll cause damage. At the same time, if we're too conservative, if we don't continue advancing the field, we lose a tremendous opportunity for economic growth and to solve a bunch of really hard problems. So our goal is to be bold and responsible together. And with respect to, for example, image generation, at Google we've done that. We were quite slow in releasing image generation tools. We wanted to understand the societal impact of these tools. And so, we've moved at a very measured pace with respect to releasing these technologies. We want to be sure that we have the right security in place, that we have the right responsibility teams working on this, and that the work that we release actually is worth something, unlocks some sort of opportunity that's meaningful. And hopefully this sets up, this is a chart that we use a lot internally, this flywheel of innovation. Research drives product. Product is used by users. Users tell us what works and what doesn't work. That comes back and feeds the research, right? And this is, the researchers in my group and the researchers across the AI world have really changed in the last 2 or 3 years to thinking about products, about building things people use every day. It's tremendously exciting. Frankly, that's because the stuff we built 10 years ago didn't work, not very well, right? So we're solving really small problems and moving kind of the math and the field, but now we're seeing an unblocking of real capabilities, and so researchers are thinking about, how do I build products? How do I take the insights from users and bring it back? And this is my last slide. We have a wide menu of applications: crisis support, speech, cancer screening. It's so great. The flood detection work is exciting. You've probably all used Google Translate. Fraud detection, the transportation industry, better representation of ethnic diversity in photos, what we all look like, and general productivity. It's a very exciting time. At 30 years, this is by far the most exciting 18 months I've been part of. I know I ran over a little bit, but I hope you learned a little bit about neural networks and about what we do. You'll sleep and think about elephants tonight, your favorite animal, and thanks for letting me run over a couple minutes. It's really exciting to be here. Cheers.
Thank you, Doug, for those insights. Next in our program is a panel on unlocking the potential of AI. Please welcome our panelists and moderator Peter Chandler, Vice President of Federal Policy from TechNet.
Great. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everybody. That was fascinating. I learned a lot from that. Although I would dispute one thing. I took calculus my senior year in high school, and I thought it was really hard. I'm TechNet's Vice President of Federal Policy and Government Relations. Again, thank you for joining us today for our AI for Good event. For our first panel today, Unlocking the Benefits of AI, we are joined by 6 TechNet member companies that work across the industries of education, hiring, financial software, online marketplaces, identity verification, and real estate. We're excited to showcase just a few examples of how AI is being deployed for good. To begin, I'd like to welcome our 6 panelists and ask each of them to introduce themselves and their member companies. Let's begin with Chris McNeely.
Hi, I'm Chris from Chegg, and Chegg is a educational technology company focusing on saving students time and money and making them smarter. And we started off by renting textbooks, and now we serve over 8 million students with digital educational services. We believe students should have every opportunity to succeed in school and achieve their career aspirations, and we think that with generative AI and technologies today, we can empower students to learn more efficiently and more effectively. In fact, in April of this year, we launched a AI-powered student learning service with the help of OpenAI and GPT-4. And we're hoping that by expanding this conversational learning platform and companion, that we'll be able to take students the next step in their journey. Thank you.
Great, next, Nathan Lunderbaum.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm the chief IL psychologist with a company called HireView, and HireView is an organization that works in the HR technology space, predominantly providing technology to unlock opportunities for individuals to identify and achieve their career potential and whatever job it is that they want in their career aspirations sort of thing. So my team specifically at HireView, a team of psychologists and data scientists, et cetera, the science team at HireView works to use AI and a variety of different methods that we'll talk about a little bit later to facilitate that hiring process and identifying the best match and potential of individuals for whatever job it is that they're interested in achieving and obtaining.
Great. Alon Amit.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I'm with Intuit, the financial software company you may be familiar with. We are supporting individuals as in their financial lives through products such as Credit Karma and TurboTax, and small businesses with QuickBooks and MailChimp. Our mission is to power prosperity around the world. And I lead product for AI at Intuit. I spent some years at Google and Facebook as well doing AI, even to the left of the slides that you had there, like prehistory. So that's on a personal note. Thank you.
Great. Next, Masumi Nakamura.
Hi, Masumi Nakamura. I'm VP of Engineering over at Mercari. Mercari is well within the sustainable, secondhand marketplace, very much where we're interested in making everything that anyone sees or has as something that someone could sell or buy secondhand. Very much a lot of what we're very interested in is furthering using technology as a platform to both create that means by which physical items can be translated into this digital item world and then translated back through transaction. A lot of the AI that we've been doing have been around very much what you would expect. Recommendations, trying to get people to create descriptions around the information of the item in an easy and understandable way. Most recently, we did a MerChat interface where we, working with ChatGPT, we made it very easy for people to interface and get our items in a conversational way. So very much looking interested into where this is all going to go.
Thank you. Katia Mar.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Katia Mar, and I'm here representing the fraud protection industry. I've been very lucky to have spent my career in cybersecurity space. I've worked for a variety of startups in Silicon Valley and outside of it, solving different problems with AI and disrupting markets such as finance, healthcare, life sciences, and real estate and e-commerce as well. And today I'm working with this wonderful company called Onfido. It's a UK-based company, but a global big company that exists in digital identity, remote identity verification space. And as everything has moved online, so has fraud. So we exist at this very interesting intersection of human expectation for instant gratification when they want to open a financial banking account or get into a gaming site just at the time of the big game, or they want to rent a car seamlessly, or before that when arriving at the airport or departing for the flight, wanting to go through the security without being bothered. So on one hand, you have that desire. On the other hand, you need to be sure that the people doing that are who they say they are, to both protect the individuals with identities as well as the companies that are servicing them. And that's where Onfido is in this intersection. And we have really cool AI that helps solve this problem.
Thank you. And last but not least, Farah Akoum.
Hi everyone, I'm Farah Akoum. I'm Senior Director of Product Management at Zillow. I have 15 plus years of experience in the AI field. Worked on different applications, machine translation, risk, identity, conversational AI. And at Zillow, we're focusing on how we can use AI to basically make home a reality, whether people are here to rent or buy or finance or sell. Since 2006, actually, since inception of Zillow, we started with the Z estimate. So this is basically a machine learning algorithm to predict the home value. And so you can imagine how this has democratized access to a key part and information of people's welfare, and also reduced barrier and bias towards things where it was mostly related to people, and now it's based on objective data. And since then, we continued using AI. You can see it today on our app. We're the first real estate app using natural language search, so that people can say two-bedroom apartment, with an open concept kitchen, etc., to make it more efficient. And during COVID, people were flooding on Zillow because we have, virtual tours, which are computer-based algorithm based on photos, where people can have a deeper sense of a home, and this is how AI can help you make better decision in a much more safe and equitable way. So I'm really excited to be with you today to talk about real estate, AI, and also some of the guardrails there.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And these are just 6 of our member companies. We have nearly 100 at TechNet, and virtually every one of them is using AI in many of the ways that you've heard from already today. Let's go to Alon of Intuit for our first question. I do just quickly want to take a point of privilege. Thank you, Intuit, for getting me the first federal tax refund since leaving Capitol Hill 4 years ago. I really appreciated the help. Alon, can you tell us a bit about what AI means to you and your industry, and provide one example of how your customers benefit from this technology?
Sure, and you're welcome. If you look us up in your favorite search engine, you'll find that Intuit is an AI-driven expert platform, and that those are not just words. We've been using AI for years now to help people prosper. There's hundreds of things you could do with AI to make this better. I'll mention 2. A quick one is people have to import lots of documents, your W-2s and 1099s. And Doug mentioned the ability to parse documents and understand what's written on them. Not easy. We've been doing this with AI, now with generative AI, adding to it for a long time. Another example is cash flow prediction. You're a small business. We know your transactions. We know your. We can see your business numbers, and we can help you predict your cash flow, where things are going, and help you make better decisions. Those are like 2 out of 100 examples of the way AI is used today at Intuit.
Great. If you can figure out how it can help me lose weight, let me know. All right, I'd like to give everyone on the panel the opportunity to answer the second part of that question if you'd like to. Give us one benefit your customers are receiving from AI technology.
Maybe I can start. So this year, as I mentioned, we launched natural language search, and it was very much covered during the presentation of Google, how large language models are changing the behaviors of people. What we heard from customers is when they're looking for a home, they're looking at a lifestyle. So it's a long list of wish, open concept, yard, etc. And 60% of the people, they start their search online, set their budget online without even talking to someone. So before, we only had restricted filters, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and now with the new large language models, including BERT, one of the models from Google and others, we are able to basically provide a way for people to express themselves naturally, like they're talking to an agent or a friend, and say, I want a home that has a big backyard, etc. We've seen a lot of engagement, 40% of people are using it, and more people are talking to lenders and agents. So we know we're basically doing the right thing for them.
Great. Chris from Chegg?
Yeah, I think this goes back to Doug's presentation, but our students don't know how to talk about the course they're trying to learn, right? And so there's kind of a translation problem, and maybe this is the challenge you had in calculus. You don't know how to talk about calculus until you learn calculus. And so being able to chat to an AI and use the words that you're familiar with in the way you want to ask the question, and then have it be able to translate and then explain it to you in the language that you understand, and extend that across the semester so that it gets more sophisticated as you grow and learn the language of the course, we think is going to be very powerful for our students.
Great. Nathan?
Yeah, so after they go to school and before they can buy a house, they have to get a job. One of the things that we do is we help facilitate human decisions in using AI in the hiring process. So some of the outcomes that we've had are certainly efficiency outcomes, like one company went from a 4-week hiring process to 4 days by using the AI. So people are getting jobs quicker, et cetera. Outcomes for the individuals, though, we're seeing diversity improvement. One company had a 16% improvement in the number of diversity hires that they were making because you have less biased AI driving and helping the human decisions and taking the bias out of the human decision-making process. And then other, performance outcomes. People get the right job with the right fit. They perform better. They stay longer. There's less turnover, but they promote quicker, et cetera. So, and then they can go buy a house. Finish.
Katya, I'm assuming, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take the security angle to that. So one of the examples that I've given earlier where my company can help is, think back a couple of years ago when the pandemic started and we were all confined into our apartments. So life kept going on, right? We still needed to pay the bills. We were looking for entertainment, perhaps more digital entertainment, and continuing to interact with each other, but it's just things were online now. And so more so than even before, and now it's kind of progressing, but if you think about your financial life, if you wanted to open up a banking account, you no longer could or wanted or had to go to a branch, so you had to do it remotely, and a lot of financial institutions enabled that. And so the process goes as they will ask you to present a document, an ID or a passport, and take a picture of that in front of the screen, doing it with your phone, and then after that, take a picture or a quick video of your biometrics, your face usually, and then match that biometrics to a tiny, teeny picture, pixelated picture on the document to be sure that they belong to the same person. It's the face matching. And so how can you do that in a remote environment without deploying the AI tools, so machine learning? It's pretty much impossible, or it would take a ton of time to send this information to some remote analyst who can try to visually make an assessment where things match up, and the security and the assurance of that type of approach is not as high as it would be with AI. So in our case, in enabling our remote lives, our digital lives, AI is certainly extremely helpful.
Yeah, I'll actually add to the security and safety arena. It is one of the obviously one of the big areas that everyone needs to contend around, especially in commerce. Everything from fraud to whether something's counterfeit or not. So the use of AI we do is we attempt to detect whether or not something is truly what a person has described, or is something that the individual has over time proven that they are actually a good lister and seller. So use of AI allows us to ensure that our consumer base feels safe when they do these transactions. So.
Great. Let's dig in a little bit now on some of these issues. I want to go next to Farah Zillow. How is your company thinking about and implementing responsible AI practices?
Great question. We at Zillow are very much committed towards responsible AI because we do believe, there's a right for people to have accessible and equitable home ownership and access to home. So we do this with the principle of safety, fairness related to, fair housing rules, as well as transparency. So I'm going to be a little bit more crisp and give some example here. in the interest of sharing. When it comes to safety, we never use private information when training our models. We follow private regulations, law regulation in every state. Also, we make sure that the data that we feed to the models are objective data that are also vetted by our analysts, where we basically look at the data and see if it's correlated to any bias, etc., before feeding the model. So it's not like we're training the model on all the internet, garbage in, garbage out, and we have a little bit more control. When it comes to fairness, again, we're part of the Fair Housing Rule and all of that. We have a interdisciplinary AI ethic group from legal, scientists, etc. And so what we do is basically, first of all, make sure we have a crisp idea what type of data we use or don't. For instance, we don't use safety or crime data because we know it's correlated to some sort of discrimination. While we do show users school rating is linked to some biases, so we don't feed it to the model. And it's a job that this interdisciplinary group came together and done. And so they do the audits and the vetting before we launch our models for home recommendations and all of that, or even the desire estimate. And finally, for transparency, our users have to consent when we're using their data, behavioral one, etc., even for the purpose of personalization, so that we can tell them why and when they're using their data. And I hope also other companies do the same. We even use transparency when we're trying to define the problem we're trying to solve. So this, recently we've done a user research where we basically ask users, where do you want to have AI, generative AI, help you during the task versus a human being? So we're basically going to the areas where people want more trust versus wants a human being, and then we basically do this in a very much customer-centric way. And of course, we share our learnings through blogs, coming to these forums, and all of that.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask the same question of you, Alon, at Intuit.
Sure. Farah touched on many very, very important points. Transparency, privacy, not training the models with private data, having a governance committee watch over, before you launch anything, it gets reviewed. We have a responsible AI process that looks at privacy, transparency, fairness, accuracy, many other aspects of each model. I want to touch on a couple of other things. Inside of Intuit, any developer today has access to something called Gen Studio, which is an environment to develop generative AI models with all the benefits that folks have spoken about, and I can mention a few more. You don't get to do that without doing training. Like literally on the screen in front of you, you don't get to log into the tool without checking a box that you've gone through a responsible AI training, so that every developer, thousands of developers across the company have gone through that same training. So it's not only the system that enforces it, but people know. People know what they're supposed to achieve, what they're supposed to do with all the dimensions that were mentioned here, which are very, very important. So just to give one example, generative AI today, for small business, email is key to keep in touch with the customers and to grow. Writing the content for email marketing takes thousands of hours per year, and a small business owner is not necessarily a marketing person. They don't enjoy doing this. We just recently launched to MailChimp the ability to write email marketing content for you and just literally say, I need a promotion next week for this category of products. The email just gets written, you can edit it. So that's just an example of the thing that people do with generative AI, but they do it within this framework of responsible AI with a very diverse committee of governance and this responsible AI review before anything gets launched.
Great, thank you. To go a little bit further on this, we've heard how we're implementing responsible AI practices, and I'll turn to you, Nathan, for this first. Behind all of this technology are humans, right? What are some ways that AI can be used to address or improve issues in human decision-making?
Yeah, thank you. The best way, in our opinion, is to mimic human decision-making, but you have to remove the bias out of the decision-making to build your data set so you don't have a biased data set. So there's training applications that are used in our field when we're trying to collect human data to then build algorithms upon that data or based upon that data, you need to get the bias out of that data. So we run the human raters through various training programs, et cetera, so that they can evaluate, let's say we're evaluating an interview response, they can evaluate that interview response for fit for a job in an unbiased manner, and then you build the algorithms based upon that. But we've also extended that even further and looked at different methodologies. So the field of biopsychology has a long, long history of measuring discrimination and bias in various talent tools like hiring. So we use those statistical methods and have expanded upon those to actually look at ways of removing the bias out of an algorithm. If you have enough data, you can do that without losing the prediction of what you're trying to predict, whether it's a job fit, success in a job, some personality measure, whatever it might be. So our approach is design the algorithms you have less biased data if you can as much as possible. If you can't, then design methods to remove the bias out of the ultimate algorithm that gets built so you minimize that bias, and then countermeasure that against human decisions on similar data sets without the assistance of AI, and you can start to look at what are those differences in discrimination as the last step, and then publish those results, right? So we've gone a long way of trying to publish in academic journals, peer-reviewed journals, et cetera, and books around the methodology and the design principles behind this.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go next to Masumi and then Chris.
Once again, I mean, Nathan's spoken quite a bit on where it ought to be going. For us, the other thing I'd like to add is to the point that everyone's making around data. Data, the input, the output, really the input matters most, and how we humans ingest it needs to also be mimicked and properly mimicked within the AI system. For over in the e-commerce side that we do, one of the other areas that we really want to pay attention to is how the AI begins to show us stuff that we never thought was possible in ways that both delight us, but also keeps us very safe. That arena is something that we're very much dedicated to doing and implementing both the tools, the processes in play.
Chris?
Yeah, I think, accuracy and completeness is always, the highest priority for Chegg in our answers. And so mostly STEM, calculus, physics, electrical engineering, those are the subjects that AI models aren't that great on, but they'll sound confident, right? They'll sound like that's the right answer even when it's not. And so our platform takes our 150,000 experts that are on staff, have them answer questions manually, continue to do that process, but then also QC, quality control, manual answers plus the AI answers. And then that data feeds back into the model to improve the results going forward. And so we spent the last 8 to 10 years perfecting this manual review process, and it just flows naturally into our AI training and the improvement of our models, because again, our students don't know whether the answer is right or not. They depend on Chegg to tell them that this is the right answer.
Great, thank you, Chris. Just a little advocacy point here for what you mentioned and for all of this technology your companies are using. This is why we work so hard with policymakers to try and increase investments in STEM education and also change some of our immigration policies to attract the best and brightest to America because we need people implementing this technology. I'm going to go next to Katya, and it's a similar question, but you do so much with the digital verification. How do you make sure that the AI isn't actually exacerbating exacerbating biased outcomes?
It's absolutely a great question. I want to start by reflecting on what Masumi has just mentioned about some of the benefits of AI, of the way we use AI. This is a fraud protection, right? And there's a gazillion of fraud vectors that we're aware of, so we can just do a somewhat simpler matching to what we already know. But there's also so much cybercrime and so much fraud that's happening that we don't yet know about. So how do we protect the companies from breaches? How do we protect individuals from their personal information being stolen. This is where AI can be extremely helpful because when trained properly, it can predict the future types of fraud. It can prevent those attacks from happening as they happen instead of us having to deal with the damage of that. So the benefits are quite clear. At the same time, going back into the bias conversation, thinking about the digital identity verification, or identity verification in general, right? When a clerk in a bank is verifying your identity, and potentially could be a biased human individual, as we all are by design. There's some kind of bias that exists within all of us. That individual can impact one life at a time. When we're thinking about AI, an automated way of verifying identities, the machine, if biased, it can impact the lives of tens of thousands of people or more. So it's extremely important for us, for the companies providing the services, for us companies that provide the service of fraud protection to take in that concept and develop the machine learning models, develop the systems that keep the bias in mind. In fact, all the models that we develop, we sort of assume that at first that they're all biased and work backwards off of that. Specifically at Onfido, when we're talking about identity verification, a part of that is verification via biometrics, which is kind of where the bias can flourish potentially. And so there you have age, gender, ethnicity, and also accessibility limitations. So a lot of times, the bias in machine learning models, in artificial intelligence, comes from insufficient diversity and variety in data sets. And so if you're only working off of the previously captured data, then likely you will not have the good balance, especially if you're like Onfido, a global company where we operate in more than with data from more than 195 countries, individuals coming from those countries. How do we ensure that everybody is treated equally and is given access to the resources that they're trying to access? And so this is where actually the generative AI can be extremely helpful to us, because if we are aware which data sets are missing, lacking the data, then we can help AI create those biometrics to supplement our data sets, and we now can train our models based on much richer sets of data and hopefully be less biased, to eliminate bias. Another point I want to make is what I strive, and our company is very good at that, because we're very extremely open about measuring bias in our own systems. We constantly publish how we perform, how we improve, or how we decline. We last year released a really cool AI bias white paper that could be helpful even for consumer, just to read how that stuff is done. So we stay at the forefront of that. But the transparency about how our data is processed in everyday life is something that we as consumers should be demanding of the companies that we interact with. AI has sometimes a bad rap because it's perceived as a black box. Well, AI bias is even more scary in that concept. So the transparency behind the processes that the companies deploy to address AI bias, the principles that stand up upon, and their progress in addressing potential bias within machine learning models, within their data sets, is something that we should regulate, I think.
Great. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask each of you to answer it yes or no. So what you're saying is it's important to get AI right, eliminate bias to the best of your ability, and deploy this responsibly in order to maintain faith with your customers. Just go down the line. I just want everyone to hear that in no small part we're doing this because it's important to customers.
100%. So it's all about building trust with the customers. What I wanted to add, it is part of the data and transparency, but we need to also understand sometimes our customers themselves are biased, right? So for instance, we have a lot of customers who wants to search for home in safe places, but we know that this is correlated with bias. So how do we address this without them feeling frustrated, right? Or in grades, again, rating schools, etc. And the way also to address it is in the spirit of establishing trust and dialogue is this full circle, right, of like enabling customer to give feedback in the UI, in other things, so that if something goes wrong, we actually have the right processes internally to go and react to that thing. But 100%, we are here in a new adventure with AI, very much like we secured the way we drive the car after we had horses. It's the same thing here happening, where we have to understand what's the seatbelt and all of that science.
Great, thank you. Alon?
Just wanted to add, we spoke about the risks of bias and how we must ensure that our AI methodologies eliminate or reduce bias, and that's super important. I also want to speak about the flip side of that, which is the promise of AI to reduce bias that already exists inherently in the system. One area where we see this is in lending. Small businesses apply for loans a lot. Small businesses need cash. If you ask small businesses what is the biggest challenge facing them, they're always strapped for cash. QB Capital, one of our products, is offering loans to small businesses, and we do this at scale because we have over 10 million small businesses that we serve. Those loans can be offered because we can use AI to predict risk and understand who we can offer the loans to. 60% of the businesses who receive a loan from QB Capital confirm that they could not have gotten this loan elsewhere. They tried and couldn't get it. So AI can reduce bias in society and in our economy if we use it responsibly.
That's a great point. Chris?
Yeah, I think, our students use Chegg because they have trust in us and the high quality of the answers. Anecdotally, we get questions from our students saying, I generated this answer with ChatGPT. Is it right? Right? And so they need to know that the thing they're learning is what they should be learning. And so we're focused on, keeping that trust and expanding that trust, and then helping our students learn in the way they want to learn as well.
Great. Nathan?
Yeah, I think one thing to add, the removing bias to your best possible level within the algorithm is spot on. Everybody has to do, they have to be transparent about how you develop it, et cetera. I think I would add what's called an explainability statement, and we published last year the first explainability statement in HR for AI. There's been others that have been done, but that, I think, takes it to the next level, which is, here is how we've developed the AI, here's how we've measured bias, here's how we've minimized bias and improved it, and here's how you can then do the same thing if you want or you so desire, and that gets into the trust in the, for the general populace or your buyers or whoever it might be. Those explainability statements get pretty detailed, but they're very valuable, and I would encourage more people to explore that.
Great. Mr. Lee, anything to add? I want to make sure I give you a chance on this one too.
Sure. I mean, obviously, much like everyone's saying, we need to reduce the bias. But I do want to add, lastly, there is that AI is a tool. At the end of the day, it is a reflection of what we choose to do with it, as well as a reflection of who we are. And the real question comes down to whether or not we want to put the best foot forward of who we are utilizing these tools. And ultimately, Alon brings up the good point about helping reduce bias within ourselves. This is the key element. Any tool can be used for both good and ill, and it's really about who we are, who uses it.
Great, thank you. I'll give everyone a chance to answer this question. There's been an explosion of interest in Washington and the administration on Capitol Hill and in state legislatures all across the country about AI. And what is our AI policy going to look like? In your view, is the current regulatory landscape supportive of the evolution and adoption of AI in your industry? And let's start at this end of the table with Farah, and we'll just work our way down.
In my view, it is actually a great thing that we have the discussion that is open like this, and we want to have these sort of policies and regulation to guide our work. So it takes a whole team. Now, obviously, we would like to have it a little bit more advanced stage so that we can unlock the innovation as well in a very much secure space early on. So hopefully we'll get to that point, but we welcome all of these efforts to push towards the regulation for more AI, for AI.
Katya?
We love regulation. I think regulation opens the doors for establishing the guidelines of how the business can be run, and so it's very helpful. Onfido being a UK-based company or headquartered in UK, so we'll certainly benefit from a slightly more advanced regulatory landscape within UK and within European Union, and we are part of EU AI Act, where we, together with policymakers, composing the set of rules that they're planning to establish across the technology vendors in the country. Definitely absolutely love being a part of this discussion and here with the leaders of these companies and the policymakers and the Senate. It's very important to have this chat. It's very important to get on the same page about goods and bads of AI in this particular case. I don't think any of us should be scared of it anymore. It's out there now. Let's harness it. Let's benefit from it. Let's do it together, and let's make sure that, in our case again, that if we don't do it fast enough, the bad guys out there are already employing it to their full benefit. So let's catch on and get going.
Masumi?
Yeah, I mean, regulation's absolutely necessary. The question that I really would love us to begin to move forward on is how do we enforce those regulations once we establish that? One of the big elements is really, it comes down to how do we encourage the best of us as well as reduce the worst of us? And both the regulation will give us the rules, but also that enforcement will ensure that we can make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I'll make a few points. One area in regulation that I think is helpful, a helpful way to think about it is to think about the outcomes we're looking to achieve, not about the ways to achieve them. Technology is moving so fast that if regulators try to say exactly how you go about doing something, it becomes irrelevant within months. However, specifying the outcomes, the what are the things, transparency, no bias, safety, security, accuracy, those things are important. And I'd encourage everyone to look up the NIST AI framework that was published. I think we think it's a very good one, a very good starting point. Another thing to think about is simplifying the landscape. So I'll give an example of privacy. Privacy is crucial, and it's fantastic to highlight it as a requirement. Right now, our small businesses need to wrestle with, I think, 13 different privacy laws in different states. Every small business operates across state lines. Everything is done online. Having a federal privacy law will just simplify that. So we think it's a great thing for our customers.
Great, Nathan?
Yeah, I would mimic that comment. We're for federal regulation and around AI. What we're seeing in the absence of it is state and local regulations coming up in our field, specifically New York City Law 144, for example. It's not an AI law, but it's a law that everybody's calling it an AI law, but it's really around automated employment decisions being used and regulating that. So what we're finding is our customers, ourselves, and other companies are having to comply with laws that are being created in every municipality, every state, in every city that are coming. So we're all for federal regulation. Properly designed federal regulation around, again, the end result is how you start to measure it, how you got there, et cetera, and documenting those methods to help protect people that are creating the AI for good versus the individuals that have malintent and not following proper channels and proper parameters and checks on their AI.
Great, Chris?
Yeah, I'll try not to repeat what everyone said. The way I think about it also is it's going to be different by sector, right? Different sectors are going to need different levels of regulation. And so some are, more high risk, some perhaps are less. And there's also different use cases that should have different tiers of regulation. So there's, what's the next TikTok video I should watch, right? That's probably less risky than, should I get a loan, right? Or other use cases. So I think by mapping this out by sector and by tier, I think you can have different levels of regulation that can promote safety, but also continue to push forward on innovation, which I think we all agree want to keep pushing ahead on.
Great, thank you, Chris. I do just want to point out, please use TechNet as a resource. I want to personally recognize Megan Dorn on our team, who handles AI. She did a great job putting this event together today. But like I said, 100 companies, we want to talk with you about this, so never hesitate to reach out. Lightning round, super quick, short answer. Take out your crystal balls. What is the one big thing you want to see AI solve for good in the next 5 years? Chris?
Sure. I'll stay away from jetpacks and translating what my mother-in-law is telling me. But I want to focus on emotional support, right? What we learned in COVID is students are struggling. Like, they don't know how to cope, and they're a little further behind. And so just pushing ahead on emotional support, building something that people can talk to and can relate to and communicate with in a supportive and empathetic way, I think is exactly what I want to see in the next 5 years.
Great. Nathan?
Yeah, I think I would focus on agriculture and healthcare, and not really thinking about Western civilization, but really populations that don't have the benefit of the agriculture and healthcare that we do. In the end, if AI would be ubiquitous as our mobile phone, we'd be there, I think.
I would think about small businesses. So other than going to visit their customers in a self-driving car, I would speak about their chances of surviving their first year, which today is, I think, only about a third of small businesses manage to go through the first year. We believe this number can be pushed way higher using technology, using AI. It's actually a stated company goal for us. So I would look to see this miracle happen in the next 5 years.
Great. And Sumi?
Kind of falls under Chris's area, but train the trainer. One of the biggest problems in this country is we literally don't have enough teachers. More importantly, we don't have enough teachers who teach teachers, which is really a thing that everybody can actually learn if you're given enough time. I think AI can provide that support.
Great. Katya?
I wish I could say that in 5 years we will solve the fraud problem, but I think this will keep going on and we'll keep fighting and having jobs. So I'm going to go a different route. So 5 years from now, our population is probably going to be much higher. So I'm going to go the holistic route of hoping that AI can help us solve the resource distribution for the overgrown population, especially in the light of the climate change that we're experiencing.
Great. Farah?
Yeah, I'm one who follows AI all the time, so there's a lot of applications, agriculture, education, healthcare, and there's a lot of promises there just because of all the data and how we are able now to process them in a much more advanced way. But going back to the real estate, the question to the team here, how many of you have bought a house or is thinking about buying a house? Raise your hand. Keep it high, keep it high. Okay, how many of you from those who are thinking or bought a house think it's an easy process? Okay, so that's the problem here, and I do feel like we're gonna have much more knowledge and education for the people who are outside some of these processes and make them more transparent.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. America can do this, and we look forward to working with all of you to make sure we win the next era of innovation with responsible AI. Thank you so much to our panel.
Our next topic is AI and the financial system.
I'll let you guys.
Please welcome Brad Peterson, Chief Technology and Information Officer of NASDAQ, joined by TechNet President and CEO Linda Moore.
Brad. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it. I have to do a shout out to NASDAQ too. They've been a member of TechNet for a very long time, and your Executive Vice Chairman, Ed Knight, is not only a longtime friend of mine, but also our chairman. So we greatly appreciate our partnership with NASDAQ. Thank you.
Excellent. And there's Ed standing up. So,
Ed.
hey, Ed.
Thank you, Ed, for all of your leadership. We appreciate it. So let's dive right in. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at NASDAQ first, Brad.
Sure. So I joined 10 years ago, so I had a career in technology the whole time, mainly on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, but I was in telecommunications, in financial services at Charles Schwab when the web trading and internet boom happened, and then I was at eBay and PayPal, and then back to Schwab running technology in a similar role, CTO and CIO, and then 10 years ago, I said I'd never live in New York City, and I had the opportunity to come lead the technology at NASDAQ. So I did move to New York City, best thing I ever did. And we've really changed the company over that 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about next, is most people think of NASDAQ as a stock exchange, but they don't really understand that you're a fully fledged technology company now. And I know that that was a huge priority of your CEO, Adina Friedman. And I want to just ask you, how has that positioned you to really lead in AI? What has that transformation at NASDAQ been like for you?
Yeah, and of course, everyone does know the NASDAQ market, and we started that, and we had one market just over 50 years ago. We also have many of the TechNet companies are NASDAQ-listed companies. So that's what everyone thinks about with NASDAQ. What has happened, though, over the we've really grown to be a global technology organization, and Adina chose those words. She had a choice of saying we're a technology-enabled financial services firm or a fintech company. And she really, when she took over as CEO over 6 years ago, thought about the strategy and said, you know, we are really a technology provider, so we're a technology company. And she was bold enough to use those words rather than, I would say, the less and kind of ambiguous fintech. You know, what is a fintech really? So I give her a lot of credit for having that vision. And what has happened over 10 years is we provide technology to, and we own and operate 27 markets in the US, Canada, and in Europe. And by being a technology running this critical infrastructure for those countries and societies, we perfected software that when it comes time to modernize around the world, oftentimes other countries and exchanges and financial companies will say, maybe I should look at buying this rather than doing it myself. I don't have the skills. So we have become the leading provider of technology. So if you think of Salesforce or Workday, people used to build their sales systems, they used to build their financial and accounting systems. Now you buy it because it's a much better system, and it's across a much wider group of folks. That's what we are. Some people don't know that piece of it. And then the other thing that happened during that time was really the modernization of infrastructure, and really I'm talking about cloud and financial services, and even more so financial services in other countries. Cloud has been adopted very slowly. NASDAQ has been on the lead of cloud adoption. So we have taken regulated systems. We've worked with our regulators to get in Europe and in the US with the SEC to get cloud infrastructure to be something that is accepted, and we pioneered that. It turns out that positioned us very well because that's where the AI revolution is happening. It's really happening on top of a cloud foundation of data.
Got it. And what's your approach to AI with respect to your customers and also your employees?
Yeah, if you're talking to, it's a helpful way we've come up with this separation of how you think about where you use AI. We have been, for over 6 years, we've had an AI team that is looking at the use of AI in our products. And so we think about, we like that little nuance of AI in your product. So there, you heard some of the product managers on the prior panel, and they're thinking about how do they differentiate, how do they make their product better. The other one is AI on the business, so in the product on the business. And here you have the ability to just amplify your employees. So how do you make their jobs more meaningful? And there's a lot of drudgery in a lot of our jobs. So some of this is really augmenting your employees so that they can do more of what they really like about it. So two areas we see great applicability on the business are for our engineers, and we're almost half the company are engineers building these technology products. There's drudgery in documenting the code you write. So think about the generative AI. If you saw those Venn diagrams, the generative AI has great promise for testing code better. That's a drudgery part of engineering, for documenting it, for turning it over to more junior engineers as you want to move on to more sophisticated things, and training. It's just a wonderful learning. It's a very iterative way of learning. So we see anyone that generates content, which engineers, it really is a content generation profession, as is marketing, and as we have a regulatory and compliance group. So lawyers generate a lot of content, they do a lot of research, and they do a lot of summarization. Turns out generative AI is really wonderful at summarization.
Got it. And how does AI impact your customers? How do you feel that you see it most impacting those who are listed on your exchanges?
Yeah, so for our customers, that as evidenced by the prior panel, just about everyone that's a technology company, everyone that's, most of the NASDAQ listed companies, we have a lot of the biotech firms, so I think you made some comments in your intro about just where we think this can benefit human health and solving serious problems there. So I would say the biotech firms, the medical service industry is going to benefit greatly. And then the technology companies and banks, anyone that has to deal with bad behavior on their platform or fighting fraud. And Katya had a lot of great examples there about how it's related to fraud. For us, that's one of the other areas that I'll talk about that NASDAQ has gotten into that area, and we also agree and share Katya's views on how that can cause problems and really thwart a lot of the criminals on the other side that are using this technology as well.
Got it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, the anti-fraud, detection that you use at NASDAQ?
Yeah, so one of the areas that we found was important for well-functioning regulated markets was rule following. And we have a product, we're the leading provider of trade surveillance. And so there you're looking for, most everyone follows the rules, but the folks that don't follow the rules have an amplified effect on all of us that are following the rules. So you want to root them out, and we have a trade surveillance product that looks for patterns, it finds alerts, and people then use those for investigative follow-up. In 2021, we bought a company out of St. John's, Newfoundland, and 3 founders, engineers, came up with a way to also fight fraud for small banks, credit unions, in predominantly Canada, but we're able to expand to the U.S. And so we now have paired the surveillance technology with our anti-financial crime technology that is helping banks. It was helping originally small banks look like big banks in fighting fraud. And I can talk a little bit more about the techniques and why AI is such an important part of that.
Yeah, please do. Tell us more about that.
All right. So if you think about your someone that is perpetuating a financial fraud, and it can be it can be trying to counterfeit checks. It can be wire transfers, things like that. If you're a small bank, you barely have a technology team. And the different groups are going to go from small entity to small entity, and Verifin was able to get all of the transaction data for over 2,400 customers, put it in a consistent format, and get consent. And there's also, in the US and Canada, you can share data for fighting fraud. So when we think about that theme about let's make sure that we don't have blanket regulations that say you can't use this technology, let's make sure that for fighting fraud, for fighting cyber criminals, for making our systems more resilient, those are applications that we should apply it as aggressively as possible. So they were enabled by the advent of the cloud, and they made the choice not to put their software on premise, but to get their customers to be comfortable with the security and having their transactions live in the cloud. They had the ability to use this data in a consortium fashion to look for patterns across, and it was permissioned in. So if you think about the power, the company can opt out, but they're not going to get the benefit of seeing 2,400 other entities' patterns. And this became one of the most effective ways to fight all those things that I talked about: wire fraud, check problems, using techniques that are AI generated, so computer vision to see when someone has tried to counterfeit a check. Using machine learning, which we heard about before, to really look for the patterns and detect when someone is sending. And if you think about wire fraud, is about not necessarily who's sending it, but who's receiving it. So if you look to that and see the patterns, that this is a bad endpoint, you can actually do quite a good job of eliminating wire fraud. And then more importantly, it's just being quick. So someone may get burned, but you get great feedback, because if someone loses money, the model is going to be very accurate, because you're going to tell the bank, I got ripped off. So this feedback loop is really important in AI, the ability to fine-tune and jump on a new trend. So the company we bought that's now a part of us is called Verifin, and right during the pandemic, so we bought them in 2021, they could see a lot of the payment scams that were coming out that were pandemic related. And by having this technology, you can see that quickly. You can start to protect your 2,400 companies, banks, financial institutions much more rapidly.
Got it. And, a lot of people might think, well, I'm not a bank, or, so any of this wire transfer fraud or transaction fraud doesn't affect me. Should people think of that differently? Is there a human impact of being able to clamp down on this kind of fraud and abuse?
Yeah, and that's what we were really impressed with. The folks we have that work in this area, when we looked at the motivation, they kind of took it to the why. So why are they in this business? Why do they feel so strongly about building it? And what you see the root cause is this is at the root of these financial payment frauds and things like that is elder abuse. There's human trafficking, and as we heard with the pandemic, there was also scams, just opportunistic scams. So they see themselves as crime fighters. So that at the root of this, the AI is used. It just manifests itself and shows up, the evidence, in a financial transaction. But if you go back a couple steps, there's someone that is being impacted, and if we can narrow the opportunity for the criminals to actually get paid, they move on to other opportunities. So we have to use it everywhere. If we move it out of this area, they'll look for another opportunity. I'd love to use the mobile phone example. So I was in telecom when there was 1G, so we're at 5G moving to 6G. And you used to drive from the East Bay into San Francisco, and you'd go over Treasure Island. There were a group of people with scanners, and your phone would get cloned every time. You couldn't go over the Bay Bridge without your phone cloned. And we put in 2G, we put in a brand new network, and those phones came with SIM cards. And if you think about it, it moved all those fraudsters to pretty much ATM fraud. So, and then it took another 20 years in the United States for us to get the chips in our cards. Europe had it sooner. So this technology, that's a great example of saying that, and it's hard to give the credit card industry, you had to change out all the readers and things like that, but the mobile phone industry didn't have the ability to make customers okay with fraud, so they had to solve it technologically. So maybe that's a good call to action for timing. If the technology's there and it can be used and people can get comfortable that we're going to be using it in a responsible way, let's move faster and let's move swiftly.
Got it. Thank you. How do you think that the private sector and government can work together to ensure that we move as quickly as possible to clamp down on fraud?
So we of course operate, there's some constructs that work. NASDAQ has a SRO, a self-regulatory organization. Mm-hmm. So there's, is it Matsumi? Is that? Yeah, so I think he said it best, this notion of this is a tool and we're going to, it's going to amplify who we are. We're going to show up in the, how the AI is used in our business for our customers, and ultimately, are we doing it in the way that we're proud of? So I would say there's a great opportunity to balance. There's responsibility. So this self-regulatory organization, the set of rules, it started with people pledging to do it right. So that's a great step. And then there's, I would say, something we don't want to do is have a patchwork of 50 different rules by state. So there's a great opportunity to collaborate globally for fighting fraud. So I would say that, but that's not easy these days. So let's at least start doing it, in the U.S. With Canada, with Mexico, and get it right there if possible.
Right. And in your opinion, is AI a force for good?
Yeah, absolutely. And just like any technology, and folks mentioned that earlier, it will be applied by the evil side equally. So I would say, the businesses that are public companies have responsibility. They have, they're held to a higher standard. I think we can take the good, and there's tremendous amount of good to be had for companies using it, and then we have to narrow in how we prevent the criminals from having a free reign of just using it for amplifying their deeds.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you one just sort of last question, too, that I've sort of been thinking about lately. In some instances, we see that, AI can be used for bad if it gets into the wrong hands or used for nefarious purposes. And, there are people who are going to do those things, in any instance. But in some instances, AI can detect AI. AI is good at finding other AI that's trying to trick the system, so to speak. And are you seeing that kind of ability in your sphere with anti-fraud?
Yeah, so there's actually an AI technique that does that. Mm-hmm. So that's how it improves. It has one side of it is trying to do a fake, and the other one is detecting it. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty brilliant because it improves its ability, and oftentimes this is used for image recognition. So that's the simplest thing. So if you think about it, you do want to have it, but it is really just it's one of the more popular algorithms in machine learning, mm-hmm. and it's called generative adversarial networks. So it even has the adversary on it, but it's really used to improve the algorithm.
Mm-hmm. So overall, you feel like AI will have a positive effect on your company, but also overall in society?
Yeah, I do, and I would end one more on the way that this is, that things like ChatGPT have been made available. Mm-hmm. And we also, the fellow from Google, I saw he left already, but there was a language model that Google open sourced in 2019 called BERT that we were able to use. So I do believe the way that companies are open sourcing things, they're making it very widespread. The access to it I would say anyone that didn't raise their hand till they've used one of these tools and tried it, it's free, it's available, and it's worth just getting a better understanding of it. So that, I think, is going to be a difference in just how people can engage and learn across the world. There's going to be a lot of positives from that.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. We so appreciate you lending your expertise.
And congrats on your announcement yesterday.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Up next, we have a discussion on smart U.S. AI policy. Please welcome our panelists and our moderator, Megan Dorn, Federal Policy Manager at TechNet.
There we go. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Megan Dorn, Federal Policy Manager at TechNet, where I lead our AI policy portfolio. Today's panel is on smart U.S. AI policy. This panel comes at an important time as AI has become the hot topic on Capitol Hill and in the White House. Last Friday, the White House announced the voluntary commitments of 7 leading AI companies on how they're planning to govern artificial intelligence in the way that it's developed and released to the public. These revolved around 3 principles of safety, security, and trust. While over here on Capitol Hill, over 25 AI bills have been introduced and over 10 hearings have been called since Congress gavelled in back in January. Majority Leader Schumer has provided senator-level briefings, the 3rd of which will be held tomorrow, to help ensure members are educated on this important, innovative technology as they begin to consider legislative proposals. Thank you to our distinguished panelists for joining us today for this important discussion. I'm going to allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their member organization. First, Gabby D'Admo of Accenture. We're very good at that at TechNet.
So I'm not crazy. Does that work? Yes, perfect. Doesn't show up, but it's working, hopefully. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Megan. My name is Gabby D'Adamo. I lead our North America Government Relations Office for Accenture. Accenture is a global technology services and consulting company. We have over 800,000 people around the world, and we've been using AI to help our clients for almost a decade now, and also helping them develop their own frameworks and foundations so that they can scale AI as well.
Fantastic. Heather Foster of Lyft.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. I am at Lyft. I run all of our federal and international policy, and we are a transportation network company. We are devoted to transportation. Last year, we had over 45 million rides in terms of rideshare, our bikes and scooters, and so transportation is so critical to communities across the country, and we're very committed to ensuring that we're providing innovative and safe ways for people to have transportation.
Fantastic. And Hugh Gamble of Salesforce.
I echo your thanks for being here today. This is a wonderful opportunity. This is a huge pivotal moment for AI. We hear a lot of conversation around the opportunities for AI. If we get this part wrong, those opportunities are going to be truncated. Salesforce made a pivot towards AI about 9 years ago, 2014. And we have been working with AI and finding ways to put AI into Salesforce's CRM system. And those of you that aren't familiar with Salesforce, it's customer relationship management software where we help companies utilize the data that they already have on their customers and find ways to interact with them, market, sell, service to them, potentially in a better way with more insights. AI is going to turbocharge that. We feel well positioned in that market right now and are really looking forward to emphasizing smart, nuanced policy regulation as we go forward in this debate with policymakers, not just here in Congress, but around the world. I run our federal government affairs operation, and we look forward to being a part of this conversation and hopefully continuing the conversation with some of you afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hugh. For our first question for Gabby of Accenture, what are you seeing from your clients about how they're thinking about and implementing responsible AI practices? Are they utilizing any existing government resources such as NIST's AI risk management framework?
So I think the one big thing I would say is all the companies that we've been working with really truly want to do the right thing. But they're all kind of starting at the beginning of their journey. And we did a survey recently of C-suite executives, and we found that only 6% of them had really built an AI framework that they were using and a foundation to implement. And I think we ask ourselves why that is. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you don't have good data, you can't use AI. So we recently announced a $3 billion investment over the next 3 years. Part of that investment is going to be in an increase of 40,000 employees, so work on data and AI issues for exactly that reason, to help companies start getting a handle on where their data is, what it looks like, how it's stored, and then be able to take that next step of developing an AI framework that they can implement.
That's fantastic, and I imagine you guys will be getting a lot of calls from companies to help them get set up. Thank you, Gabby. Heather, moving to you, and ultimately we'll open this up to the rest of the panel. What do you think policymakers should take into account when they're developing AI regulation?
Well, I think it's very important that policymakers are doing the listening of what is actually innovative, what is making things improve. We've heard a lot of conversation today about the ability to, disrupt things like fraud, protect consumers, the things that about AI that are going to lead to protections, that's going to lead us to being more innovative. Those are the things, but also thinking about what are the guardrails, right? So many of us have already been using AI for a while. I know at Lyft we use it through our machine learning. So the key will be us sharing those learnings and ensuring that they can be, in the actual policy to make sure that we are safe with our AI.
Gabby or Hugh, do you want to add any thoughts?
I would simply add, we believe that there are a couple of smart starting points as you start to regulate AI. AI is powered by data. That was something Gabby just mentioned. We still need to pass a federal privacy law. If you want to control AI and want to understand how to potentially have any controls around AI, you should understand that it's powered by data, and therefore understanding and having a baseline to protect the fundamental human right of every individual to privacy should be baked into this. So I believe that should be a foundational piece. And the other thing that Salesforce has leaned into in this conversation is a risk-based approach. A chatbot that is seeking to teach college students how to cook shouldn't necessarily receive the same level of scrutiny from government as some of the more high-stress AI impacts that we all typically read and hear about, national security concerns or financial concerns, or that impact other fundamental internationally recognized human rights. And so those are sort of initial conversations to have as you start down this road.
The one thing I'll add for policymakers to really think about is I think trust underlines all of these conversations that we're having around policy decisions. Without building trust, companies can't scale AI. And I think when I think about that, there are two different pieces to that, and it might look a little bit differently if you're a developer than if you're a deployer. So I think we need to think about just like consumer products. If a manufacturer was putting something on the market with all of the security pieces in place, and it's used in a way they didn't intend, then it's inherently going to have more risk. So what we develop for policy might look different for a developer than it might for a deployer.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic point. I also want to take a point of privilege and plug that TechNet is the leader of the United for Privacy Coalition, which is a group of over 20 trade associations advocating for a national federal privacy law. So we absolutely agree with you, Hugh. We think it's crucial to this conversation on AI. Hugh, to follow up with you, another question. A big focus of the AI discussion has been on China. China is expected to more than double its annual investment in AI to $27 billion by 2026. How can the U.S. government and leading American technology companies work together to ensure the U.S. remains the global AI leader?
So I think there's a fork of that conversation that's about regulation. Getting regulation right is the first component. You've got to make sure that you're providing guardrails to protect individuals while allowing companies, academics, and anyone else that's in the industry to try to innovate and push things forward. I'll also go back to the CHIPS and Science Act. CHIPS was what was talked about. That got all the ink, antiquate a little bit with the ink reference, but it got all the press. But the end science part, there's a lot of reform of NSF in that bill, long needed, meant to modernize, to find ways to push for more cooperation between government and private industry and researchers to move that forward. I think implementation of that in a smart way is going to go a long way to help us. But you've already seen that in the U.S., if you can create a hospitable environment for innovation and market development as we have in the past, it puts us pretty close to the front of the line, if not at the front of the line.
Absolutely. Heather, Gabby, any thoughts?
I mean, I think it's just important also to take a look at, use case specific and how are we really thinking about bias. So that to me can really bring us in the leading edge if we start to set examples early of this is what bias looks like. Here's how we can mitigate it.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add to what Hugh said. I loved his answer on science and investment. I think we've seen in 22 of the last 28 years, we've seen a decrease in the research, basic science research. Same point on CHIPS and the authorization for the National Science Foundation. We think it's really crucial that we fully fund the work that they're doing.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic point, Gabby. Going to Heather, are there any AI models or frameworks that currently exist that you think governments should be looking to as they consider developing regulations?
So at LIFT, we have been using the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This framework was released this year, and it is something that we have been able to do and look back at our own algorithms. What is happening? How are we able to evaluate? And this is something that we hope the government as well will continue to set more frameworks, kind of look and do the research. I think partnering with companies is going to be continuing to just be instrumental in making sure that we have the movement that we need and that we're setting the correct standards.
I'll add to that. I think the technology industry, and I think industry generally, are pretty comfortable with NIST as a body. And the reality is for us that this technology is going to continue to advance at such a pace where legislating on every nuance is just not going to be practical. And so I think NIST in their framework not only deserve a shout out in that context, but I hope they'll continue to be an integral part and participatory in the future regulation of AI.
And adding to the NIST point, I think if there's good news here, it's that there's been, I think, a pretty broad coalition around what the core principles should be for a framework. We actually released a responsible AI framework about 6 years ago, and the 4 pillars that we had in our framework are very similar to what ended up coming out in NIST and a number of other frameworks that we've seen in the last couple of years. There was one recently put out by the Business Roundtable, which our CEO leads with Brad Smith at Microsoft. And all of them are really built on kind of similar core principles. So I think that's a lot for policymakers to get started with.
Definitely. Awesome. For Gabby and for Hugh, how are you feeling that the current regulatory landscape, do you believe it supports the evolution and adoption of AI for your clients?
I think at the end of the day, whatever it looks like has to be kind of globally harmonized, and it has to be predictable for companies. There needs to be a standard set of definitions so that multinational companies can be able to follow that without too much confusion and regulatory burden. I'll leave it to you for the rest.
Yeah, I'll just pick up the ball and run with it from there. We work with Accenture pretty extensively. And the global nature of the businesses dictate that what we need is some sort of standard that allows for global industry, global corporations, the global economy to function. That's standards around definitions, around how you're approaching this. And so we want for regulators to make sure that they're communicating and heading in the same direction. I'll also add to that it's vitally important that it be careful, nuanced. There are people out there that think we need to rush into this and do things quickly. It's more important to get it right than to get it quick. And one of those examples you highlighted a second ago, but I'll mention it again, which is Salesforce we're a big believer that if you are using our platform, you should be able to choose which components you want to use. And therefore, with our AI, you can bring in LLMs that are ours, or you can use our system and bring in a third-party LLM, one you've self-developed. And so there is this distinction between developer and deployer. Like, somebody can develop something, you can develop the platform, but you could have a third-party LLM, and then you've got an end user, which in this case would be a company. And where does the responsibility lie between those three? That deserves a real robust conversation.
Absolutely. To follow up on Gabby's point about global harmonization, an incredibly important conversation to have. How do you feel America's AI regulatory framework stacks up with our, allies and competitors? Open-ended.
Yeah, I'll simply say I think we're about as far along as most people, which is to say not that far. The actions that have been taken are helpful. They start to point in a direction, but we're very much at the beginning of this process. There are entities that have made the beginning of the process go a little bit further, but everybody is still in the beginning of a process of figuring out how to regulate this industry.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that, we are just, I wouldn't say on track, but I would say that we are moving at a pace that I think will definitely keep us competitive. And I think that the efforts that you're starting to see, whether it's from Congress, the government, it's all coming together to ensure that we are just as competitive, we are investing in the same way, and that we're setting the same standards.
Absolutely. Heather, coming back to you, right now, obviously, there are many regulations written at our federal agencies. Do you think there needs to be modernization of any of these existing regs to handle AI's development and for companies to use AI in the way that's most beneficial for their customers?
Yeah, I definitely think that companies are going to continue to know what's useful. We see quickly, often at Lyft, we have to use AI because one of the big things we hear is people are relying on transportation. They want to make sure that they're being picked up at the right spot. It's the biggest thing we hear about ETAs. And so, when it comes to ensuring that people have the best technology, we're implementing those best practices. We meet with agencies regularly, and this is the type of partnership that the private sector should have with the government, where we're able to inform and they're able to really put together policies that advance us in the right direction.
Hugh or Gabby, any current federal regs that you think might need to be modernized for AI?
Nothing specific comes to mind, but I know from experience that government is a slow adopter of some of these new technologies. AI especially has a real promise in government and constituent relations, and a lot of that means your constituent and their engagement with the executive branch. But I think that, again, rightfully so, they're being careful and slow because those interactions do have to have a certain element of perfection to them. Look, we're enough in the infancy of this technology that we're still dealing with these hallucinations and things like that. And I do think private industry, enterprise, we have a pressure that you don't see with the chat GPTs and chatbots of the world. Our customers are Fortune 100 to small mom and private industry companies. they're not going to tolerate inaccurate information from us. And so there is a market pressure on us to solve a lot of that problem. But I think once you see that problem solved a little bit, it will feel like safer territory for the government.
Mm-hmm. I'll take it a little bit of a different way and say, in adding one point, that I think that the federal government can really lead by example here and set standards and a framework for federal agencies to follow in a transparent way that then can be kind of looked at, and through the process we can discuss what works and doesn't work and be able to use that as a guide as well.
That's a great point. Many proposals have been put out there as to what potential AI regulation could look like. And, as I said in my opening remarks, over 25 bills have been introduced in this session alone, and I'm sure somewhere in this building someone is drafting another one. What do you think would be the biggest concern that might inadvertently end up stifling AI innovation from proposals you're seeing right now?
I'll start and say maybe a more general answer, that I think so much of this needs public-private collaboration. And Megan, you brought up earlier the White House announcement yesterday with some of the leading AI developing companies, and I think that was something that we were pleased to see. I think so much of this is needed for the two sides to collaborate and talk about what works, what doesn't work, what requirements should be in place. And I guess I'll say that the policy process takes a really long time, as we all know. And so to the extent that the private sector can come together and say we're coalescing around these standards and these security measures, I think that's really great.
I also think it's important to recognize that there are different types of AI.
Absolutely.
And that is one of the things in legislation, that it should be clear, these are the safeguards that we're providing for generative, right? This is what we're going to do to machine learning. I think it's really key to make sure that that is coming across in all of this policy that's being drafted.
No, you make an incredibly important point. These generative AI systems, are quite novel, but AI, the base technology, has been with us since the 1950s, and making sure that policymakers know that there is a wide spectrum of AI tools that currently exist, so that way when we're developing these policies, we don't inadvertently shoot ourselves in the foot and shut down things that have been working quite well here. Hugh, do you have any final thoughts on that question?
I'll just add that I've already said I want it to be done right, not quickly. Saying you want a really nuanced debate around that is sometimes lobbyists speak for we don't want this done quickly. That is not the message I want to deliver. We want it done carefully and quickly. The faster corporations and private industry have some rules of the road and some certainty, the better off we're going to be, and the more that you'll see private capital investment in this area. But our biggest concern, back to your initial question, is people reflexively taking a swing at this issue and not understanding the complexity of it before they do so. We have not experienced that in most of our conversations around this on the Hill and otherwise, but it's such a monumental concern that it sort of sits in the back of our head of we need everybody to be careful and very thoughtful about this approach.
Absolutely. Gabby and Hugh, you both mentioned that both of your organizations have put out AI policies or principles that you stand behind. I know Lyft puts out a fantastic report every year on all the amazing things you guys are doing. It is a great read. I highly recommend it. Talk to me a little bit about how you all go through that process internally to put out, how your company's going to be advocating in these issues.
I can go ahead. I'll go first. We have, years ago, Salesforce stood up an Office of Ethical and Humane Use. It's not exclusive to AI products, but with all of our products, we look at them for any potential pitfalls around bias or any other sort of negative unintended consequence. And so our Office of Ethical and Humane Use has been involved in not only our internal processes of developing these tools, but we have been using them in conversations with NIST and with the White House AI Commission, and they've been directly and personally involved, that office, purely focused on the ethical implications of products and making sure that we're doing everything that we can by design at the front end to get it right and therefore not have to correct it on the back end, though obviously that level of doing audits and accountability, and they're in place. But you have to come into this with an understanding that data can be prejudicial if you don't handle it correctly, even if it's not intended to be. And so it's those types of, and a lot of things at the end of the day, we can produce a completely devoid of any sort of ethical concern product, and it could be misused potentially by an end user, and that all that concern comes back. And so we have to look at those different levels of control and make sure that we're addressing them correctly. But from a development software perspective, we feel very proud of the fact that we have plugged this Office of Ethical and Humane Use into this process from an early process. And they're wonderful to work with, actually. They are not an impediment. They are part of the team, and they are additive, not subtractive. It's fascinating.
I would say my answer is probably pretty similar, but at a kind of fundamental level of why we developed our responsible AI framework 6 years ago, a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were employing these technologies for our clients, and we needed to make sure that we were doing it in a responsible way. We needed to be able to be transparent with our clients about how we were using it. So it started long before we even thought about what we would say to policymakers about the issue, but it was very client-centric. And similarly, we recently, I guess not so recently now, but earlier this year, we set up a Center of Excellence to deal with generative AI. And much of that, again, was the same idea. If we're going to be using this and researching how it can help our clients, we need to be very clear with our employees about how we're going to use it. We need to be clear with our clients about how we're going to use it, and we need to make sure in a giant organization around the world that we're all kind of understanding the risks and making sure that we're managing those well. Yeah.
Awesome. This fall, we are expecting Majority Leader Schumer to convene his innovation forums, which will be bringing C-suite executives and major engineers from AI leading companies to help educate senators on some of these key issues. Imagine for a moment you are Senator Schumer. What do you think is an important topic that one of these innovation forums needs to dive into? What do you think members need to be educated on when it comes to this technology? There's a lot.
I definitely think demonstrating what exactly is machine learning would be very helpful for policymakers, because we hear so many swing terms, but it's like, how is that really implemented in my daily life? How is it, is it machine learning when I hit the brakes in my car? Is it when I get a reminder on my app to do X? People need to know how this is happening in their real life, and that way it's going to help shape the policy. It's going to make this issue real when often, we've heard the word AI a lot, this year, but people often do not understand beyond artificial intelligence, how is that really impacting my day-to-day life?
I'll again pick up the ball and say that transparency, AI can oftentimes look like a black box. And that is, there is no silver bullet solution for that, but there are things that you can do to provide clarity and understanding so that individuals understand the why of what they're seeing. Maybe they may not understand all of the different calculations involved, but the level of transparency that we can provide, they need to understand the limits and also the options for accomplishing that. And it can be as simple as you as a human being deserve to know when you're talking to a computer or another human being, or it could be explaining to you the data sets that are being used to make those decisions, whether it's and to produce the information for you. To the extent that you can provide an understanding in Congress of transparency's limitations and the opportunities, I think that's a significant educational hurdle.
I'll add two things to that. One is, I think having that basic understanding is fantastic, but also understanding how AI is going to be used by various industries. So oftentimes, and I think for good reason, policymakers are going to the developers to have these discussions, but really understanding how companies are using it in their everyday work and how it's going to affect their clients is really important. And the other thing I'll add is looking at the workforce. Obviously, maybe this part comes a little bit down the line from the basic education roundtables that they'll have, but I do think we need to have more of a conversation about how it really is going to affect the workforce. I think there's a lot of doom and gloom of it's going to steal all of these jobs from all of these people, but what we found is really kind of the opposite. And if you look at generative AI in particular, we found that it could really have the potential to transform about 40% of all working hours, and that's not getting rid of humans. That's to the point made earlier. It's augmenting the work that they're doing. It's helping them get rid of kind of the really boring stuff that they're doing, and be able to use their brains more effectively in decision-making processes. We've seen that in particular in generative AI's application in the Security Operations Center, and how it can, much faster than humans can, take in the millions of data points that an organization is getting on all the cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities that it's seeing, and make sense of where the differences are, what's standing out in a much faster way than a human can. And I think that also gets to the point that we're all kind of dealing with, not on this topic, but on the similar one of cybersecurity workforce gap. We have a lot of trouble in our country and around the world in filling all of the cybersecurity roles that need to be filled. And I think generative AI can play a really big role in helping to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. I think the productivity question is a really important one that we need to be talking about when it comes to AI's impact to the workforce. So thank you for raising that, Gabby. I did want to provide an opportunity. Today's event is titled AI for Good, and I wanted to see if you all wanted to share maybe some stories from your organization on how AI is improving the lives of everyday Americans.
Who's going first?
Hugh, since you tried to slide it off, I'm going to make you go first.
I go first.
I think from a Salesforce perspective, I'll go to a very high altitude. Salesforce is a tool that's utilized by nonprofits and NGOs around the world, 20,000+ of them. And simple integrations into things like marketing emails where you no longer have to draft. It's the tedium of a job where you can draft an email. It can give you a populated initial draft. It can tell you, from the predictive AI side, it can sort through leads for fundraising and tell you who might be the most fruitful call for you to make. So it's the incremental steps where we're helping nonprofits and NGOs be more efficient in their jobs and to hopefully raise more money.
Yeah.
So I think it's as simple as that.
I'm happy to go. So one of the things that we have, it's called Smooth Cruiser. And this is a report that's generated weekly to many of our participating drivers, where they're able to see, from the data, what have they been doing in the past week to make their ride safer. So is it braking? Is it, is the phone located in the right place to prevent any distracted driving? And so we've been able to use AI in a way to ensure that everyone is having a safe ride. Once again, also for passengers, when they want to know where they're being located, where are you being picked up? It's exactly on the corner. This is the type of information that's being passed on to drivers to ensure that we're keeping people safe on the platform.
I think I probably accidentally answered this in the last question, but I'm biased. I have a cybersecurity background, but I think the ways that it can be used to improve how we protect our information systems is really exciting. The other example that I'll give, besides the last one, was we've been using it in helping court systems be able to make sense of all of the data that they're getting and be able to run searches much more quickly and efficiently, to be able to identify trends And I think there's probably a million other examples like that where we have huge data sets and it's just not possible for humans to go through it in the same way as quickly and efficiently.
Absolutely, and I will say these stories like this is part of why TechNet has launched our AI for America campaign to make sure that the benefits of AI are known far and wide to everyday Americans. So this technology and how it's being used to better their lives. You know, coming to the end of time here, you know, if you were to have one golden item in your AI regulation, what would you like to see?
That's
I can go first if that's maybe helpful while you ponder. One of the things that TechNet has been an advocate for is the authorization of the National AI Research Resource, which is a cybersecurity and cyber infrastructure to connect universities and small AI developers so that way they can leverage resources that they might not be able to get a hold of if they're not in a major company. So that way we can continue to spur the fantastic startup culture that made Silicon Valley what it is and helped get many of our leading TechNet members to where they are today. So that's one goal that we're continuing to advocate here at TechNet.
I'll go next and say that I'll go back to what I said initially, which is it needs to be a risk-based framework. And you basically, in addition to potentially constraining new non-critical ideas that might come forward, it also creates a barrier to entry to new market players. And there are some corporations that probably wouldn't see that as a bad thing. We do. We want to foster, plant 1,000 flowers. And so what we want to see is a framework that correctly protects Americans, humans, wherever the regulation is existing, but also allows for natural market forces to occur in areas where the government really doesn't need to be playing a role to protect you, and allow for those companies to innovate, grow, and hopefully start to challenge incumbents and create a really robust ecosystem.
I would definitely like to see some standards around bias. The fact that, there's so much information being collected and data, but really having a standard around bias so that each person is not just creating it, and so that we know that we can efficiently use this technology without having to worry about reducing any efforts around diversity or creating unnecessary bias.
I think that whatever is developed has to get to the point that we were talking about earlier of building trust. And to do that, you need to do what Heather mentioned and address the bias issue and kind of the ethical policies and procedures that you're going to put in place. You also need to deal with the data management piece and making sure that you have clear guidelines for how an organization is going to handle that. One of the most alarming stats that I saw recently was a survey that we did that showed that 75% of C-suite organizations that we talk to think that they run the risk of going out of business in the next 5 years if they don't scale AI. So I think you have to get all of that right to be able to harness it in the way that we should.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for being here today and just give an opportunity for any closing thoughts that you all have just here.
Pass a privacy bill.
All right. I agree.
I would just say partnering together. I think particularly on this issue, just being able to educate and create some of these standards. I love, that everyone is coming out with principles, and I think that is really going to help us moving forward.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think collaborating with the private sector on this, getting a real understanding of how industry is using it across all critical infrastructure industries is going to be really key.
Well, thank you all again. I really do. We're so grateful for this panel's participation. If you'd like to see a little bit of the AI regulation conversation continuing, the Senate Judiciary Committee is having a hearing this afternoon specifically looking at that issue. So again, couldn't have had this panel at a more appropriate time. Thank you again.
After a quick break, our next discussion is titled Driving Change, Founding an AI-Empowered Car-Sharing Enterprise. But please come grab a lunch and enjoy your break.
a CEO and founder, which is a really unique role that you see a company in a completely different way. Before we start, I'm Carl Holzhauser. I'm TechNet Senior Vice President, and I'm just thrilled that you're all here for this great day. Our AI Good event is the first, as you know, in a series for part of our American Innovation launch that we announced yesterday. $25 million to talk about AI for good. The risks are being well covered. We want to be sure that the good benefits to society are also being covered. We're so delighted to have Sam Zaid, Chief Executive Officer and founder of GetAround, with us today to discuss the many incredible ways that AI is transforming mobility and transportation throughout America. Sam has over 2 decades of experience founding and building technology companies in consumer, enterprise, data, and artificial intelligence spaces. Sam founded Apton, a software boutique specializing in AI and cloud, as well as 360PI, an AI platform for e-commerce retailers, which quickly became the market leader in retail price intelligence and was acquired by Vista equity-backed MarketTrack. Sam is loaded with accolades. He was the recipient of several, including the EI Entrepreneur of the Year, a Microsoft Code Award winner, and a Google Scholarship recipient. His latest venture, GetAround, is the world's first 100% digital car-sharing marketplace and serves over 1,000 cities across the U.S. and Europe. So now we'll get to talk to Sam. Sam, thanks so much for joining this afternoon. I want to get you to just tell us a little bit about GetAround and car sharing and what makes you different from other car sharing platforms. And, when I think about car sharing, I think about sharing one car with my partner, my fiance, who's actually in the back today. And, I never seem to be able to use it. He's always got it. So is that car sharing, or what is car sharing?
So first, Carl, thank you for having me and having GetAround here to speak. I'm sorry about your fiance being so greedy with the car. But to answer your question about GetAround, so car sharing, unlike ride sharing, is when you share your car with somebody. And typically that could be somebody you know, but it's also, it could be a total stranger. And so GetAround, we're a marketplace. Think of us maybe like Airbnb for cars. We have people who have cars, and when they're not using them, they rent them out to people who need a car. And you can rent all sorts of cars, right? You could rent a compact car or, a luxury car or an SUV. And it's an online app, an online marketplace, and we operate today, across 1,000 cities, 8 countries, Europe, and the United States. And what makes us different is really the focus on technology first. It's creating an experience that's a very digital experience, because you think of renting your car, you're like, okay, well, I have to meet this person, maybe I have to give them the keys, how do I get my car back, how do we coordinate all those logistics? That can be a real pain and quite frustrating for the user. And so we solve that using technology by really leveraging the power of data and connectivity so that you don't have to meet anyone. You can do everything from your phone. So you can book the car instantly, you can walk to the car, you can go through that checkout process in 60 seconds, you can walk to the car, do a digital walk around on the phone, unlock the doors from the phone, get in the car, drive away. So much more seamless experience, fully digital, namely obviously powered by the data and connectivity, which we'll spend some more time talking about. And if you're renting out your car, it's much easier for you. You could be here listening to this stimulating fireside chat and making money renting out your car at the same time, and you don't have to be physically involved. And that's really where the power of AI for good starts to play in, because in order to do that, you have to have some smarts as to getting people in the car, knowing who you're renting the car to, and having a high degree of trust and safety around that process. And so it's something where we felt, you could do that by meeting someone and making your own judgment of them. If it's your fiance, you probably trust him to drive the car.
Some days.
And there's a lot of human reasoning and judgment involved in that, right? Is someone going to take my car? What are they going to do with it? Are they going to be a safe driver? Are they going to bring it back? Are they going to commit a crime? Well, an AI can also figure that out for you, and then you can create a truly digital sort of experience that doesn't require as much human or people intervention in order to function. So that's GetAround in a nutshell. It's something we've been building now for 10 years. The way we make this process work is you just need the app, And then everyone who shares their car actually has a piece of IoT, or Internet of Things technology. It's like a tracking device that goes in the vehicle, and it gets all the data from the car, allows you to securely unlock the doors to the car, immobilizes the vehicle's engine when the car's not being rented or used. And so once you hook that up, then you can really harness the power of data to build a much more seamless and digital experience. So very long-winded explanation to your question, but hopefully provides some context for the company.
It's great context, but I'm asking you to go deeper. So if I drove here today and I knew I wasn't going to use my car for 6 hours, and my partner's here, so I know it's free, the car is available, how could I utilize that on the platform right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you would have signed up presumably already. You'd have what's called Get Around Connect in your vehicle, so you'd be able to see your car's location real time anytime. Someone could open the app and say, hey, I don't know what type of car you have. Let's say maybe you're a BMW guy.
Audi.
Audi guy. Okay, so I like Audis though, all-wheel drive.
Typecast though, the shade.
Yeah, no, I was just kidding. Just so someone could come in, they could search for your car in the app. They would quickly go through a digital checkout experience, put in their driver license, payment information, and select the sort of insurance coverage that they're looking for, or they could bring their own insurance. And then as soon as they send the booking, in the background, there's a whole set of models that are running to authenticate, verify that person's account before we confirm their booking. So all of that AI and those machine learning models are running the moment someone says checkout. Let's assume someone trustworthy is renting your car. Then we would confirm the booking. They would be able to see it in the app. They get the real-time location, the pickup instructions. They can then walk to the car, complete the pickup experience, unlock the doors from the phone, and drive away. And from your perspective, you just get a notification say, hey, your car's been booked for the next 6 hours. You're going to make $100, and that's all you got to do.
So I'm thinking, well, I pay, a monthly payment. I'm not using the car. I'm driving efficiency for the use of my car by being able to utilize it when I'm not using it, and someone else can use it. But let's pivot from the way that it operates to how are you utilizing AI? And this story today is about AI for good and the positive benefits. So I don't want us to go down the path of, video games and, Terminator. Let's stay to the societal benefits that you're driving towards and the good that your platform will create using AI.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay away from the Skynet scenario. There's a number of different ways that we use AI today, and then there's, I think, a plethora of experiences on a go-forward basis, especially as AI technology continues to mature. The first and probably most important one is, for you to rent out your car, you need a degree of trust in the person that's renting that vehicle. If you look at sort of Web 2.0 or web products and marketplaces today, often they put that trust on you. So you have to say, I'm going to vet this person, I want to maybe see their driver license, I want to meet them in person, get a sense for them before they rent my vehicle. You go through your own sort of mental set of processes to make your own prediction as to whether you think that's someone you'd want in your car or not. So when we think about AI, we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it now with machine reasoning. And the advantage is you can do it probably synchronous with, you don't have to meet anybody, so you can do it right when someone expresses interest in renting your car. You also get a lot more data signals, right? So we, for example, when you go to check out and you put your driver license in the US, we will just pull your driver abstract in real time. So we'll have a bit more information about how good of a driver that person is. And we also look at a bunch of signals that are coming in to really make an assessment that we believe they're a safe driver, that they're going to do responsible things with the vehicle, that you'll be happy with them as a customer of yours. And that is all about creating trust and creating safety on the marketplace, which is really underpinned by artificial intelligence. And that's how you can then make this experience a much more instant and seamless experience. Without that, you could, but you probably wouldn't like the outcome. And so, without the AI, it's actually much worse for society because you might be giving cars to people that shouldn't have them. Whereas with the AI, you can actually create a much safer and a much more productive marketplace.
So I think what you're telling me is that by using AI, you're going to give me the trust and confidence that whoever's going to utilize my vehicle is someone that I can trust my property with and will do good things with it. And that if you are a user and you're using my car, that you're going to verify that my car is in good shape, it will do what you need, has the capabilities you need, and you can do that instantaneously using AI. Is that a pretty good feedback?
Yeah, it's a great summary. And that second piece I actually hadn't touched on yet, which is because we have the technology in the vehicle, we're also getting real-time streams of all the data. So you get, for example, the check engine light came on, or tire pressure is low. We also get high resolution photos every time someone gets in the car and every time they return a car, because they're taking both exterior interior photos through a guided process. And so now the machine can actually see the condition of the vehicle before and after, can understand how the car's driving, get all of the sensor data, and exactly that. You can create for someone booking a car, you can ensure that they're getting into a car that we believe is fit to drive, right? Now, of course, it's always machine driven, so it's a best effort, but that's a lot better than someone just telling you, hey, I think it's in good shape, and you're like, oh, I get there, and there's like, I don't know, chip bags and in the seat, and the car says, the check engine light's on and you can't drive it or something.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about the consumer application. You've done a lot in big data analytics. You've done consumer products. As you've thought about building this company and using AI, can you talk about how your experience and then bolting in AI with it has led you to found the world's first 100% digital car sharing marketplace? I'd look down to make sure I got that right for your staff.
Yeah, appreciate that. So I've been an entrepreneur now for essentially since I started my career. I had a short stint as a photonics engineer a long time ago. But when my first two companies, when we were doing AI, AI was a bit of a dirty word, right? It was still like the tail end of the last what's called AI winter, which is typically the hype and ups and downs of AI in terms of the hype cycle. That was probably the best time to be in it because there was a lot of the breakthroughs that are starting to be mainstream now have happened in the last 10 years or so. Those companies were really more focused on using AI to help enterprises, right? And so large enterprises, retailers figure out how to optimize pricing and profits.
So other big companies, not
other big
consumers,
companies,
right.
but not consumers. But what I did take away from that was a couple of things. One of those was that when we came to start Get Around, it was actually inspired by AI, and we were really looking at the autonomous car, right? The self-driving car. This was now 10, 12 years ago, back at Stanford, before self-driving cars were even commercialized, and there had been this DARPA-funded grand challenge for cars to complete a closed circuit course, and it was finally starting to happen where cars could drive and not fall off the road. And we just imagined, we said, well, look, if cars can start moving themselves around, why is everybody parking their cars 23, maybe in your case, 22 hours a day, and they're just cluttering up the streets, right? How do we help cities get those cars off the road? And if you imagine a world where all your cars are self-driving, would you just be parked all the time? No, you'd probably be either telling it to go park somewhere else or letting someone else use it. And so that idea that cars becoming more intelligent could solve our fundamental transportation problem is what inspired us to start Get Around, and then also why we decided we really needed to harness data because we'd never be able to take advantage of that transformation to the autonomous vehicle without being fully connected into the vehicle.
So I just want to pull on that a little bit more. Can you tell us how your previous ventures, Appiton, 360 PI, specializing in AI cloud technologies, have contributed to the development of Getaround's proprietary technology and its position as a market leader in the car sharing industry?
Yeah, I guess I think both with Option and with 360PI, there's a couple things that were really helpful. First, this was early, when we started it was early cloud, right? And so understanding the transformation that was happening by moving data into the cloud and being able to actually create systems that were scalable enough to...
So I'm going to interrupt you. When do you think is early cloud?
2007, 2008.
2007 and 8, all right.
Yeah. So around the time Amazon really launched, Amazon Web Services for the first time, and they had their...
And we're moving from everything being a hard drive or a server in our data center, and we're going to the cloud.
Yeah, so my first company, we actually would build data centers for clients, and that's where the AI would run. As we shifted, to my second company, there was the cloud, and that allowed the AI to run in the cloud, and so you were no longer solving hardware problems. You were really focused on solving the software problems, and you could scale, 100,000x, right? You didn't, otherwise you'd be building massive data centers for every customer, which was just not feasible. And so that was sort of the first unlock. And then I think, just being in the space and keeping a track of it really had an appreciation for where those limitations were. And I think it really wasn't until about 2017 that you had these breakthroughs with much more scalable deep learning models that have really, today everyone's experiencing in things like ChatGPT or other.
So I pulled you off the thread a bit, but just talk to me a little bit about how this contributed to your position and Getaround's position as the market leader in car sharing. Just your movement to this cloud use.
Yeah, I think it was realizing that this is happening, and so therefore setting up the company to be digital first and technology first, and really investing in the tech to allow us to both build that platform for getting all the data and building it in a way that then we could really process it in real time to do all the things we just talked about, to underwrite and understand trust and safety and how people are using cars, and really try to then build a much safer marketplace. I think for car sharing to really go mainstream, it has to be something where there's inherently high trust and all the stuff you would worry about are taken care of. And the only solution to that problem, the only way to give people consumers that confidence is by really investing in AI. And in order to do that, you need to have built the company from the ground up, the technology layer from the ground up, to be sort of forward thinking. And so coming from that space, we were able to think, okay, well, we think this is going to happen. Cars are going to become connected. We'll be able to get more and more data. How do we set the company up to really take advantage of that so that we can continue to innovate and solve what are fundamentally human reasoning problems inside of a marketplace?
So it's been interesting for you to go from 2008 on, as you just laid that out. I'm going to add another question here, which is looking forward 5 years or so, where will this market be for car sharing, and how will AI be involved?
So beyond the things we've talked about, which I think is really about establishing trust on both sides of the marketplace, fundamentally, there's no way you'd sustain a system the way it is today, right? You have tons of cars, they're parked 95% of the time, second most expensive asset for most, for the median American household, takes up 25-30% of household income. Not a sustainable situation. Much more sustainable is for people to share cars and bring that cost down, but without giving up the convenience and the flexibility of owning a car. The only way to really solve that is what we've talked about, and so I think there are really the AI around, safety and trust, and then the AI inside of the car itself, right? Once cars can really get to a level of self-driving capability, you can then have a very reconfigurable fleet of cars. And so now all of a sudden, it's just much more convenient for me to share a car. I have high confidence I can do it. The car can move itself around, and you'll shift to a world where increasingly more and more people are sharing. And this idea of private personal ownership, where one person, or in your case, two people will use a single car, that actually itself will move away. And so, really car sharing over the next 5, 10 years, 15 years, should become much more ubiquitous, and the idea of transportation as a shared mode, access mode, as opposed to an ownership mode, that transformation from ownership to access, I think will mainstream in a much bigger way.
My main question for my last one is, do you sleep? Because it seems like with all that you've done, and with how you're rapidly scaling this company and the plans you have forward, you must be a really, really busy guy. Do you have any time off whatsoever? And with that, I'll let you give your closing remarks.
I do sleep, not as much as I'd like to sleep. I think I was definitely running on sub an hour of sleep yesterday on my way here. But generally I do sleep. I'm human. I'm not an AI, just for everyone's reference. So I do need sleep. But it's exciting, and when you're working on things and these are hard problems to solve, it does take a lot of energy, and so sleep is sometimes a luxury that you can't always afford at certain times. You just try to get it in where you can. But I think this is something AI for good. I'm glad people are having these conversations because there's a lot of positive in AI and how it can be applied to so many different industries. I mean, in my case, I've applied it to, a handful. I think there are dozens more. And we're really excited about it at Get Around. We think it's something that will unlock and really unlock the potential of car sharing in a much bigger way. Really excited to be talking about how AI, everyone talks about how it can go wrong, but all the ways that can go right. So thank you for having us. It's very exciting.
And I just want to put a point on a few themes that I think are key for what you're doing, Sam, which is, for most of us, 5 years ago, we've heard this idea and be like, yeah, nobody's going to let you use their car, or yeah, it doesn't Uber do that, right? But if you think about how a lot of Americans are struggling with interest rates and inflation, they're trying to help their families, they're trying to get to school, the idea that an asset that they have to have in order to have daily life will then have other tangible benefits. They can be utilized by others in a platform to get where they need to go, to move goods and services. It's a really inspiring idea, and without data and AI, it wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be possible. So for everyone in the room, please join me in thanking Sam for joining us today, for giving us great remarks. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And if you have a car to share, www.getaround.com. Thank you.
We are honored to have with us today Representative Obernolte of California. Representative Obernolte is a highly active member of both the House Energy and Commerce and Science, Space, and Technology Committees, and has represented California's 23rd District since 2021. Since taking office, he has had several bills signed into law to help protect our nation's supply chain and to improve our defense against cyber terrorism. As a member of the Congressional Artificial Intelligence Caucus and former tech entrepreneur, he is a leader in AI policy for the House Republicans. With that, please welcome Representative Jay Obernolte.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here. So I'm Jay Obernolte. I represent the 23rd District of California, but what you need to know about me, first of all, I'm one of the few computer scientists currently serving in Congress. In fact, I would say we are underrepresented, and you, the folks in this room, can do something about that. So we need to encourage more computer scientists to serve in Congress, because I think knowledge of all things technical, but particularly computer science and artificial intelligence, is going to be very critical when we contemplate rulemaking and regulatory authority in the next couple of decades. So let's get more computer scientists in Congress. But the other thing that you need to know about me is that originally my ambition in life was to do research in artificial intelligence. I was going to be an academic. I went to Caltech, got my undergraduate in computer science there, and then was working on my doctorate degree at UCLA when my career kind of got derailed. I had a side hustle. I wrote AI for video games. I answered a want ad on our bulletin board in our computer science at Caltech from a company few people had ever heard of before, but maybe you've heard of them. They call themselves Nintendo. And they had just introduced their first game machine in North America, the Nintendo Entertainment System. They were looking for English-speaking programmers to help them write code for that platform. And so that's what I did just as a side hustle to put myself through graduate school. But then when I was at UCLA working on my doctorate in AI, something happened that changed my whole life. One of the games that I'd written for the Sega Genesis, which shows you how long ago it was an NFL football game. It went platinum, and I remember vividly reading the sales statement thinking, you could actually make a living doing this. And so that kind of derailed my career when I left UCLA. Instead of going into academics and research, I started a video game development studio that I still have today. So that was kind of the trajectory of my career. But AI remains something that I care very deeply about. When it's amazing to see how far the industry has gone. When I was doing research, it was the very early days of natural language processing and computer vision. And now you look at tools like ChatGPT, which we could not have even imagined that 30 years ago when I was at UCLA. So it's an exciting new world, but it's also going to bring challenges. So that's kind of what I'd like to have a dialogue about for a few minutes here this afternoon, is the regulatory challenges surrounding AI and what the role of the government and Congress in particular is going to be in establishing that regulatory guidance. So first of all, I think it's very important when we approach the job of regulating something to ask ourselves, why are we seeking to regulate this? I think too many people look at AI and think, oh, it's big, it's scary, we really don't understand it very well, we must regulate it. And I think that's the wrong approach. I think the approach should be, what do we fear? What are the negative consequences that government intervention can either prevent or mitigate? And then ask the follow-up question, how do we mitigate those potential harms? And if we follow that kind of philosophy, I think we'll succeed in establishing a regulatory framework that's appropriate for AI. You'd be surprised at how often I have to explain to some of my colleagues that the chief danger of AI is not an army of evil robots with red laser eyes rising up to take over the world. That's what we've been accustomed to think about when we think about the harms of AI. I think that most of the deep thinkers in AI would agree that that's not the chief danger, may not even be in the top 10, but there are very real dangers associated with AI that we are going to have to deal with. And some of those dangers are things that fall squarely in the purview of government to prevent and to mitigate. So chief amongst those is the fact that AI is going to be extremely disruptive. It's going to be socially disruptive. It's going to be economically disruptive. So we have to figure out as public servants what our role is in either preventing or mitigating that disruption. Every technological innovation has been disruptive, all the way back to the advent of the printing press, most recently the advent of the internet, but I think we all in this room would acknowledge that AI has the potential to be even more disruptive economically and socially than the internet was. So we are in the early days of this disruption, but we should think deeply about what this disruption means, how it's going to occur, who it's going to affect, and what we need to do about it. And we also need to learn some of the lessons of previous economic disruptions, particularly the ones that were driven by technological innovation. There's a famous one at the very dawn of the Industrial Revolution in 18th century England, when they transitioned from manual weaving of cloth into automated textile looms. And this created extreme disruption in the workforce because there was a large group of workers who felt like machines and technology were displacing them and taking their jobs away. So they burned those textile looms, and they became kind of an example of recalcitrance and objection to technological innovation. But if you think back to it, they had a point, right? They definitely had a point. Machines were taking their jobs away. But viewed through the lens of history, I don't think you can argue that on a societal level that was a bad thing. Because what happened as a result of the automated weaving of cloth is that for the first time in all of human history, high-quality cloth garments became available to the average person. Before, it was just the rich, and everyone else wore homespun. And so you could tell at a glance when you met someone on the street whether or not they were wealthy or whether or not they were middle or lower class, just by looking at the clothes that they wear. And this was the first time that that was no longer true. So we couldn't argue that government should have stepped in and prevented the loss of those jobs, because that also would have prevented the economic and social good that that innovation brought. So we're going to be grappling with a similar situation here because we're going to be facing similar levels of disruption. And so I hope that we get to a place where we can agree it's our job to mitigate that disruption. You know, we're certainly going to have to, first of all, invest more in education. We're going to have to embrace this idea that being a productive member of a 21st century workforce means being knowledgeable about how to use AI to enhance your productivity and help you do the job that you do. We're going to have to educate people on that. We're going to have to embrace lifelong learning because one of the things that AI is really good at is organizing human knowledge, and it's become abundantly clear that this old educational model that we currently have where we go to college and we acquire an education and then we can use that education for the next 30 or 40 years in our career, that is absolutely outdated, right? The pace of human knowledge and its advancement is moving far too swiftly for that. We have to embrace the idea that we all need to be lifelong learners. And guess what? AI is able to help us with that. But it's a complete change in philosophy from the educational model that we've followed for the last 500 years. That's going to be disruptive. We're going to have workers that get displaced that we're going to need to find new places for. We're going to have a robust social safety net to make sure that those people don't fall through the cracks. We're going to have to invest in job retraining. And we're going to have to be open-minded about a whole new categories of job that arise to take the place of the jobs that have been disrupted. So all of these are things that we're going to be grappling with in Congress. And that's not even to talk about some of the legal challenges that we're going to have to navigate. You know, the chief and foremost right now is this idea of the training data sets that go into training AI. You know, what is fair to include in those training sets? Is intellectual property fair game? Well, we think we can probably agree that creative people have a right to what they produce. That's been a long-standing tenet of our society. But we have a lot of gray area in the middle. What happens when someone produces something and makes it available for public consumption, but not with the understanding that it can be used to train AI to turn out a lot of similar works just like it, right? So how are we going to navigate that? When generative AI is used to create something, is that copyrightable? If so, who owns the copyright to that? The AI algorithm can't. Is it the creator of the algorithm? Is it the person that engineered the prompt that resulted in whatever it is, a movie, a beautiful painting, whatever it is that generative AI created? How much credit is due to the people that created the work similar to that were used to train the generative AI? So I don't pretend to have answers to all of these things, but these are the things that we need to be thinking about, not only as a country, not only as a government, but in Congress, as we tackle the regulatory hurdles around this. And then lastly, and I think hopefully most simply, we need to figure out what a regulatory framework looks like for AI. And we have a real divergence of philosophy here, because we've got the EU, who has been working on the EU AI Act for the last 2 years now, who has the philosophy that AI is this new thing. We're going to spin up a new bureaucracy. We're going to risk categorize everything that's AI related. And if you fall into anything but a low risk category, you need essentially a license, a permission slip from your government to use AI. And we're going to create a bureaucracy filled with experts and problem solved, right? Moving on. And already we've seen some of the problems with that kind of approach, because a month ago I spent an entire weekend reading the revisions to the EU AI Act that were just introduced a couple of months ago as a result of the fact that when the AI Act was created, generative AI was unknown, large language models were not yet a thing, and so they had to go back and say, oh shoot, we better account for all of these things. So that's one problem. But the bigger problem, from my point of view, is that we already have our sectoral regulating authorities that are having to deal with this problem now, not tomorrow. Now they're having to deal with this. We had a hearing in the Health Subcommittee last week in which I was astonished that the FDA testified they had over 500 applications for the use of AI in medical devices in the last year. 500 applications. So they're having to deal with this question of patient safety and the interaction between that and AI now. They're having to deal with, if you retrain an AI algorithm that they've already issued a license for, does that require a new license? Is it a condition of the existing license? They're having to think about this displacement that takes place. They're having to think, CMS is having to think about how to cover these various AI-enabled treatment regimes. So, and this is just the FDA. We have all of our other sectoral authorities that are grappling with this same problem in different domains. The FAA with autonomously piloted drones. We're having to deal with NHTSA, of course, with autonomously driven cars. So all of our sectoral authorities are already having to solve this problem. So here's the question, and this is a rhetorical question. I don't have an answer to it yet, but I think you can figure out the way I'm leaning. Do we preempt that away from all of our sectoral authorities and say, no, we're going to create a whole other regulatory body to deal with this regulation, and just because it's AI, we're going to take decision-making authority away from you and give it to somebody else? Or do we allow our existing sectoral authorities to exercise their existing power with regulating their existing spaces and then spin up the technical resources that they need to accomplish that job? And I think that would probably be a better way to go. We call that a hub and spoke model. The spokes are all of our existing sectoral authorities, like the FDA, and the hub would be a pool of technical resource, experts that could help an AI regulatory sandbox that can be used to test AI, resource that can be brought to bear, maybe an advisory body, kind of like the NTSB, the role that they play with the FAA, where they can make recommendations like, hey, have you thought about this? Because this might be a good idea. So we are in the early days of trying to figure this out, but I think that if we are guided by those principles, the principle that we need to figure out why we regulate, we need to figure out what harms we're trying to mitigate so that we can build a framework that does that mitigation, and if we try and focus on empowering the existing sectoral authorities with an eye towards not regulating algorithms, but regulating outcomes, I think that we'll be successful. So obviously it's something I care deeply about. I thank you for being here and being part of the discussion, because only by working together, I'm talking about government, industry, and academia, are we going to be able to solve this problem. But if we do, the fruits of that labor could be an expansion in productivity and economic activity that we have not experienced for 100 years. And I think that's a real benefit there waiting for us if we can do our jobs right. So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to our Q&A.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today and for staying for a little fireside chat Q&A. It is so delightful to have somebody with a computer science background in Congress who can explain to everyone and your colleagues what's happening and what it all means. I want to just start with a broad question, which is, we're talking about this now, but it's been going on for a while. Why do you think that the public and now policymakers got so quickly energized about AI after the generative AI came out?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that although from an academic standpoint, the advent of AI has been fairly gradual, that just recently we've had these generative large language models such as BARD and ChatGPT that have illustrated the potential of AI. We've got something called the Turing test in computer science that is supposed to be the test that indicates when we've achieved general intelligence in AI, and that's when someone at the end of a communications line typing into a computer can't tell if they're talking to AI or a real person on the other end. That would be called passing the Turing test. And before, it's always been very clear that we weren't even close. Right. But when you interact with ChatGPT, it certainly doesn't pass the Turing test, but I think it illustrates the potential. For the first time, people look at that and say, oh my goodness, this is almost like talking to a person. I think that's what's catalyzed the sudden interest.
Well, and you were right to go straight to what is happening in the EU. And following exactly what Europe does is, I don't believe, the right model for the United States. But they are starting to centralize into one authority. Now you hear Senator Schumer's putting together his SAFE framework. The White House, I know, put out some voluntary commitments from some of our member companies and other companies. Can you, just based on what's happening, all the activity, talk about what House Republicans are going to do? Who will you work with? What do you support that's already going on? The Schumer discussions, the White House's efforts. Give us your perspective from House Republicans.
Sure. So, to be clear, I don't speak for House Republicans. I don't speak for the House. We have a working group in AI that the Speaker has put together. It is not a Republican working group. It's a bipartisan working group. It's not a formal body. Anyone who's interested can join and show up to our meetings. He's kind of informally asked me to head it up just because I've been doing some thinking in this space, but I think, first of all, talking about the frameworks that have been offered, overwhelmingly, these are positive things. It's good, it's great that we are talking about this. I've certainly been talking with my colleagues in the Senate. I've been talking with OSTP in the White House. I think that this, the voluntary standards that they've come up with are really, forward-looking. I'm not sure these are things that I would be in favor of requiring, but it's a great first step in thinking about what does it mean when we say that AI is trustworthy? What do we mean when we say that AI is responsible? What do we mean when we say it's human-centered, right? These are not technical terms. They're kind of moral terms. There's a lot of emotional content in there. So this is all great. Talking about like the regulatory landscape, I think the thing that we need to focus on is that to catalyze the investment that's going to be required in this technology, I mean, thinking about the fact that training a next generation generative large language model probably is going to cost $100 million. That's going to be the starting point. That kind of investment can only occur if there's regulatory certainty. There's the one thing that investment capital hates is uncertainty. This thought that they could make this investment and tomorrow someone up in the government could decide, you know what, that's illegal. So we need to provide that certainty. We need to create a landscape where we make forward-thinking decisions about what is allowed, what's not allowed, and the way that government is going to intersect with industry in regulating it. And to provide certainty, it has to be durable. So it can't be that next year we change our minds and do something different, which is what's so destructive about what the EU is doing, because they're trying to solve the whole problem now. And I think what's become abundantly clear is it's going to be the work of decades, not years or months, to have this whole regulatory focus, scheme come into focus. So what we need to do is we need to take we need to be more granular. We need to take the pieces, the bite-sized pieces that we know we can digest and get right now and do those first. So to be durable, it's got to be bicameral and it's got to be bipartisan, because the one thing that we can't have is we get a new president in office, we get a change of control in the Senate, a change of control in the House, and all of a sudden all the rules change, because that's going to be very disruptive to everything we're trying to do. And this is not a partisan issue, so we're trying to engage everyone in having this conversation.
I love the bipartisan spirit that you just put forward, because this is about American jobs, American growth, America's global leadership in this space. Privacy is a great way to look at how we should have done something 3 years ago when the FTC first said we should have, and pass a national privacy law. California recently passed a privacy law. I know you're from California. They keep amending it and changing it. It's very difficult for businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, to quickly adapt, as you just mentioned, with durability. So I think a foundational need is a national privacy law, preemptive, that gives the rules of the road for how we utilize data. Do you agree, and do you see a privacy law as being a national imperative?
Yes, I absolutely do agree. The little-known fact is that before serving in Congress, I served in the California legislature, and I was the Republican lead for the drafting and passage of the California Consumer Privacy Act. So we could have an hour-long discussion about what to do and what not to do and the lessons learned from that. But one of the big lessons learned was we were under time pressure for reasons that don't bear going into, but we knew when we passed it that there were some problematic areas that we just hadn't had the time to get right, and we naively thought that we'd be able to come back the next year and pass a cleanup bill, and then the year after that and pass a cleanup bill as the implementational difficulties became clear. What we did not realize is that when you create a regulatory landscape with winners and losers, all of the winners are going to get together and try to prevent you from fixing the problems that created the winners, and empowering the people that are losers, even if it's not fair that they were winners. It's dollars and cents at stake. All the winners are going to get together and trying to prevent you from fixing those problems. So that made it much more difficult to solve those problems in future years. So that's why it's so important that we get it right. But getting to your question about a federal data privacy standard, I think it's very clear that this needs to happen, and sooner rather than later. There are a couple of problems. First of all, we have allowed a regulatory landscape to exist in the United States with respect to digital data privacy that is completely state-driven. So that means that there are eventually going to be 50 different state regulations with regard to digital data privacy. Right now, I think there are 26, as of this week. But eventually, we're going to get to 50, and that's very destructive to entrepreneurialism, because the only people that have the legal sophistication to deal with a regulatory space that complex are the big established companies. The people that don't have the sophistication to deal with that are two guys trying to start a company in a garage, right? And yet, if we look at our history, that's where the Googles and the Apples of the world came from. So we want to preserve that. We want to preserve America as a country that fosters that spirit of entrepreneurialism. So and the other thing is, it's so obviously related to interstate commerce. I think it absolutely has to be preempted away from the states, and we need to establish one standard. But the other thing is, we were talking about, when we look at AI, the need to mitigate potential harms. And if you ask me about what are the short-term biggest threats that AI poses, it's when we talk about general intelligence, that's years and years off. We have some runway on that. But the near-term threats are the way that AI uses data to make eerily accurate predictions of human behavior and empower people to influence that behavior. It's already being used that way. AI also has, because of its pattern recognition capabilities, the ability to re-aggregate digital data that's supposedly been de-aggregated. So if you go to a data broker now and you say, I want a bunch of data on this particular topic, you can buy that, and it's all been disaggregated, supposedly. But if you buy data in one field from this broker, one field from that broker, one field from that broker, AI can put that back together and identify the individual people that data comes from, because that's what AI does, right? That AI can recognize those patterns and put it back together. So that pierces through the supposed privacy that disaggregation is supposed to create. So in the near term, in the pantheon of near-term harms, that's the biggest one, and that's why we absolutely need to act on that. So we had a bill that in the House that definitely had some problems, but was a great step in the right direction, that was passed out of Energy and Commerce last year. We're working on a new bill this year. I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to succeed in getting that onto the House floor for a vote this year and over to the Senate. That's what needs to be done.
And we're optimistic it'll make it through all the way to the Senate too, but even if the House passes a really good model, it'll help with the states as they look for something to pick up on for a standard for a bill. Last question for you. There's been a lot of talk about jobs. I heard you mention it. People are worried about jobs. Is AI going to take my job? But then also, as we build the AI innovation economy, we need workers to fill those jobs. Our STEM education is not producing the students we need. Our immigration system is broken, so we're not able to get the H-1Bs in we need to take the jobs. We have a jobs problem. Talk about that in your final wrap-up, and we're so glad that you're here to talk about these items. So go ahead.
Sure. Well, that's probably one of the long-term negative consequences that people fear the most. AI is coming for your job. But the reality is complicated. And it's already, this isn't something that we need to be talking about in a decade. This is something that's already at issue now. If you look at the Hollywood writers' strike, that's one of the big elements of disagreement between the writers and the studios, is the writers would like a commitment from the studios that they will not use AI in creating scripts. So, we have to think is this a reasonable thing to have? And in a way, I hope it catalyzes a bigger discussion about this, because on the one hand, you can look at that and say, if I was a writer, that would seem completely reasonable. If we have AI writing scripts, it's going to require fewer writers, that's going to take writers' jobs away. That's something that the union ought to be fighting against, right? On the other hand, is it short-sighted to think that? Because we don't know what disruption is going to bring, only that it will be disruptive. And if we let the principles of free markets operate, it will largely be beneficial to everyone. Maybe or maybe not the writers, just like maybe or maybe not the textile workers in pre-industrial revolutionary England. But, think about this. Combine AI script writing with generative AI's ability to generate movies. You might see a world where instead of 1,000 new pilots a year, we're generating 100,000 new pilots. This explosion of content, where when you go to Netflix, you're not seeing a bunch of content that is created with a broad audience in mind. You're seeing content that was created maybe just for you, right? This is a series that's only been generated for you. That could create more, an order of magnitude more jobs for scriptwriters. A landscape like that. And yes, it would be scriptwriters who knew how to use AI to empower them to create scripts.
Fascinating.
But it's not fair to say that AI is going to take scriptwriters' jobs away. You know, the reality is much more complicated. So that's the kind of thinking, you know, extrapolational thinking that we're going to have to start doing. But to pretend that we can prevent the disruption, I think is foolish. You know, we need to mitigate the harms of the disruption. We need to manage the disruption. We need to, you know, do that instead of preventing the disruption.
I love hearing about a balanced approach, so we're harnessing the benefits of AI while safeguards to protect our workers. That's the balance that we're hoping that all the consumers, the public will think about, and not just think about the Terminator and SafeNet and the doomsday scenarios, but also think about disease, think about curing previously unsolvable disease, helping us predict, you know, severe weather, helping us with learning disabilities, helping us with our global leadership. I know China's not going to let go as they invest in AI. Having America lead it with our values and innovation is the way forward. I want to just thank all of you for your participation in our event today. I want to take a quick moment of privilege to thank the TechNet staff. If you're a TechNet staff, could you please raise your hand? The TechNet staff made this whole day possible. We had some great speakers today. I hope that you enjoyed our materials. Our staff's going to stay. If you would like to come up and speak with them about any of these issues, we'd be really happy to. Remember that we've launched yesterday our AI for America campaign, investing $25 million into getting the word out about the positive aspects of AI. So as you think about the risks, we're also going to think about the positives. We hope you'll continue this discussion after you leave here. It's certainly going to keep going. This isn't going anywhere. Thank you again, and help me close by joining a round of applause for the Congressman for coming today. Have a good day.